trapped in melancholy with the wood wands of holly, suggestions that a flicker rate to camouflage the folly, attempted mental robbery, executed sloppily, the hypocrisy, this mockery, and walk the talk with me. Put the hands up to touch the akasha, cause you know deep down there's something bigger than your wallet.
Sweet eternal balance of all that is good, true, and beautiful, friends. What a viper pit we find ourselves in on this plane. Predators from all angles try to whittle away at our ability to exist comfortably, our bodies, our minds, and at the worst of it, our very souls. My guest today has years of experience working with the mentally ill, specializing in schizophrenia and related disorders, and has gathered a mountain of insight into the true nature of what haunts far too many of our brothers and sisters, tearing apart their world and in turn all of our worlds. Jerry Marzinski is a researcher, author, speaker, and harbinger who asks us to look more closely at the phenomenon we see around us and what is happening, and what it might be that pokes and prods hoping that we will break. And Jerry is here to make sure we do not shatter and lose that which is most important. So Jerry, thank you so much for coming on Rogue Ways today. It's an honor to have you here.
Well, you're welcome. It's an honor to be able to have another source to get this information out, because the psychiatric mafia and the pharmaceutical industry are not happy with this. So as you said, I've got more than 35 years of frontline experience working. I started off in the largest psychiatric hospital in the world. Wow. That was at Central State Hospital in Georgia after I got my master's degree. And prior to that, I had a deep distrust of authority. I mean, that's how I was raised. It was just one incident after another incident after another incident, where it was almost like the universe was, setting these things up to program me to not trust authority. I
believe it was.
and I can go through all the incidents, but there were numerous of them. Yeah. And it went all the way up to, it ended at college, because I was taught by my dad that college professors were like gods.
Yeah.
And then when I found out what was going on with some of them, it shocked me. It was like the biggest disillusion that I'd had in a long time. And that professor paid. He paid dearly. But boy, from there, it also included psych professors. So even as an undergraduate, I was being told, I remember one class in abnormal psychology. I loved abnormal psychology. The first time I saw it, I was just fascinated by it. And we were asked to read a research paper done by a psychologist who wrote that if two crazy people met each other and they had the same delusion, one of them would have to change their delusion. So here I was a freshman, and what I hated about, undergraduate psych in particular, is that you cannot see these things they're talking about. You could not walk into a mental hospital and look for yourself. You could not go onto a psych ward and look for yourself. You could not question these patients. They were kept under wraps. You can't walk into a state prison and talk to the criminally insane. So here's this entire population that is kept out of general view, and we're being told that they're crazy and they're psychotic and dangerous and they can't be trusted, and that they're hallucinating and that their brains are broken, and to stay away from them.
And we have no way to verify this for ourselves.
No. If you tried to get into a state hospital or a private psychiatric hospital, or even if you were a researcher with an academic institution, you would be turned down. So risk management in the private hospitals would say, oh no, it's too much of a risk. What if these patients attack them and then now we're liable? The prisons don't want you to know anything about what's going on in there and how they treat these people, because it's pathetic. They say, oh yeah, we have community standards in mental health care, but that is far from true. That's far from true.
It's just like a method of gatekeeping, right? And like this, you have to jump through this hoop, this hoop, this hoop, this hoop, and then we've vetted you, and now we know that you'll toe the line and acquiesce to whatever we demand, and so now you can have access.
You got that right on the button. It's like, have we programmed you enough with the company line that you believe what we're saying? And it's amazing how many people come through that completely hypnotized, especially for the 4 years of undergraduate school where they're telling you what is going on, and you can't see it or verify it for yourself in any way, shape, manner, or form, unless one of your family members is schizophrenic or mentally ill or something. And even then, you're not going to understand it.
Yeah.
So just like you say, okay, here's 4 years of programming there. Okay. And then the first time that I was given access to prisoners, and not necessarily mentally ill prisoners, was in my master's program. And then the PhD, all that disappeared again. And you talk about piled higher and deeper. Oh my heaven, you talk about the programming there. It was just suffocating. It's just absolutely suffocating. So as I'm coming through undergraduate, the first time I came, here's this distrust of authority, not liking that I can't check out anything that they're telling me.
Right.
Except an experimental psych. You could go in there and you could see if you do this with rats, they will do this, and humans do the same thing. That was the most verifiable thing there was. And then later it came out with like 95%, a research organization did this, 95% of what psychologists publish is not replicable. You can't repeat it.
So it's not science at all.
It's not science at all. So they're putting out all this crap and they're publishing it. And one of the things with the PhD people is publish or perish. If they don't publish, they're not valued by the academic institution because they want to keep their name up there. They want to have the best researchers. But the garbage that they publish in psych is just, it's unbelievable. The public doesn't know this. So the first time I started suspecting this was when I was reading through the Abnormal Psych book, pretty thick book with all these mental illnesses there. And, here's all these references. This guy references this guy references this guy, and I go to the back, and it's like this guy taken from this guy who took from this guy who got the information from this guy, and it's like very few of them are out there on the front lines. They're just putting this stuff out. And I'm like, I remember scuba diving once. I was down the bottom of the ocean. I was watching this little colony of fish, and they had these little mounds, and they were all in this big group. And when one fish left to go steal a pebble from another fish would come and steal the pebble from him. and they were stealing these pebbles from each other.
But never getting anywhere.
Yeah, and the only ones that were bringing in new information were the ones on the edges they would go out of the colony and then bring the pebbles in, new pebbles. Otherwise, these guys were just the same. And when I saw that, I went, that's exactly what the fish were doing.
Yeah.
They're all stuck in this little program and they're stealing from each other, and the only ones bringing in new material are the ones on the fringes of their civilization.
Wow. What a great metaphor.
I burned up a whole tank of air just watching these guys, and I didn't even know why at the time. I had no idea. It just stuck in my mind, and I was fascinated with this.
You knew there was something there.
There was something there, but I didn't know what it was, and I was just glued to it. The whole friggin' tank of air sitting watching these guys.
Wow.
So here I am in psych class, and they gave us this assignment, and it was a psychologist writing that two crazy guys with the same delusion, one of them would have to give way and let the other guy, so if one guy said he was Muhammad Ali, the other guy would have to change to some other delusion. And even without knowing anything, as a freshman, I'm like, why would they do that? Why would one crazy guy have to change for another crazy guy? They're both crazy. So what's going on with this? Why are they telling me? And I had no way to check it out, but it stuck in my brain.
Yeah.
The other thing they were saying was schizophrenics are way too disorganized to do advanced planning or complicated planning. They're saying, well, they're so whacked out, they're just gone. And I'm like, all of them?
Yeah.
And those two things stuck in my mind. And now you fast forward about 10 years to the state hospital. And I'm working in one of the psychiatric units and doing my rounds. and I'm checking for new patients who came in overnight, or see who's causing problems, seeing who's rehabilitatable. And here's this new guy walking around talking to himself, and I kind of snuck up behind him, and I'm trying to listen to what he had to say. And I couldn't get too close, but what I did hear was like if you hear a one-way telephone conversation, you know, it was a coherent from that side. It was obvious he was talking to somebody, and it wasn't just word salad or inane words. I mean, there was a conversation going on, and I could hear him respond to one side of it. And I'm like, you know, what's going on there?
Yeah.
And then he caught me, and you know, I had introduced myself, and said, "You must be new here. You know, I haven't seen you before." Yeah, he said, "I just got in," and I said, "What's your name?" And he said, "I'm Jesus Christ." So I'm thinking, "Oh, okay." I looked him in the eye and I said, "No, you can't be Jesus Christ because I am." And I
You're
stood there.
testing the theory.
Yeah, I'm stood there waiting to see what he's doing, you know, what he's going to do. And he's looked like confused. He's like, you know, thinking, and I'm waiting on pins and needles to see what he's going to say, you know, because here's this, you know, could this be, is this going to check out? And then he looks up at me and he goes, "Okay, we can both be Jesus Christ." And he
Wow.
puts off. And I'm like, damn, they lied again. You
So
know,
it's
how many
instantly
more
disproven.
lies have they told me? You know,
Yeah.
so here it is going from what I distrusted to finding. Now, you know, of course, once I was programmed to distrust, I was looking
Right.
for that kind of stuff. The guys who were fully programmed, they weren't looking. They knew what the truth was. They weren't asking any questions. You know?
They didn't
So I
need
was
to.
programmed.
Yeah.
Now they didn't. I was programmed totally differently. Uh, Another one that came up was it was pretty interesting. This was the disorganized theory. A friend of mine was working on another psychiatric unit at the hospital. And one day I went over to visit him in his office, and here's this psychiatrist there. Now, the state hospital there didn't have the highest quality psychiatrists you could find. I mean, some of them were
Shock.
some, some of them were pretty questionable. This guy was really bizarre. The psychiatrist for his unit he was American, but he dressed like Sigmund Freud. He had a jacket like Sigmund Freud. He had a mustache and beard like Sigmund Freud. He smoked a pipe like Sigmund Freud.
Wow.
He looked as much as like Sigmund Freud as you could look. And here he is in a psychiatric hospital, you know, smoking this pipe. And Ed introduced me to him, and you know, he said, "You need to see this guy." And both of us are looking at, you know, I walked away and I went, "Oh my God," you know. So he was the psychiatrist for that unit. A few months later, Ed calls up again, and he says, "Hey, you need to come over here. You need to see this. This is, you know, hurry up before they fix it."
Yeah.
And I said, what are you talking about? He said, "Just get over here." So he went over there, and we went to the psychiatrist's office, this Sigmund Freud's office, and looked in there. And here was this pile of shit in the middle of his desk shaped like a pipe.
Oh, wow.
What had happened is that a schizophrenic from 3 floors up, okay, now each of these floors is manned by attendants.
Yeah.
This psychotic guy slipped down 3 floors, all manned by staff at like 3 or 4 in the morning,
Wow.
went to this psychiatrist's office, picked the lock somehow, broke in, got up on his desk, and took a crap in the middle of his desk, shaped it into a pipe, and then escaped the hospital.
Wow.
He got away, and they never found him.
Wow.
So here's another one. Oh, they're telling me they're so disorganized. They can't.
Right.
It was amazing what that guy pulled off.
That is amazing.
So after that, it's like, how many other lies have they told me?
Right.
You know, are the voices really hallucination? And they didn't even mention the voices hardly at all. They just said schizophrenics hallucinate. You know, they're broken from reality. They're what these things they see and hear and experience are hallucinations due to chemical imbalance of their brain. They've been trying to explain it for years. First they blamed the mothers. Oh, the mother ate something bad, or the mother was the mother this, it's her fault. Then they went to genetics, and they couldn't prove anything with genetics. And if you go through the history of psychosis, that's all the way back to Egypt. It's bizarre what they're doing. The most recent one is there's some now coming up. Well, it's due to the food they eat, and the big one that has been totally disproved is the chemical imbalance theory. There's something wrong with their brain. Their brain isn't firing right. But they say, okay, the brain is chemically imbalanced. They don't even know what's imbalanced. They don't even know what the chemical balance of the brain should be.
Yeah.
They don't know what's out of balance. So there's, I don't know how many neurotransmitters. There's a bunch, 13 or more. They don't know which ones are out of balance by how much, and they don't have any tests at all. None, zero tests to measure what is out of balance. So, here I am when I first got to the state hospital. I'm like asking every psychiatrist I work with, every psych nurse I work with, and a lot of the attendant staff, what causes this? And it's like the honest ones, and there were few of them, said, well, we really don't know. There were some psychiatrists who did say that.
Good for them.
The majority of them would say, oh, it's a chemical imbalance in the brain. And I'd watch what they do. So they'll pull a patient in, and they'll go, okay, what are you experiencing? And, even prior to that, I got to go through, because a lot of people who have schizophrenic family have no idea what's going on with these people. So the average schizophrenic, before they ever get to a hospital, okay, they're wandering around doing their own business, and all of a sudden these voices appear in their head that sound like their own thoughts. There's not a lot of difference between how they sound as far as voice volume and temper and anything else than went through their heads normally, except the messages are way different.
Yeah.
They're way different. They're always consistently negative. And here they are struggling with what's going on with me. This isn't right. Something's wrong. This voice or voices are telling me all these things, and I don't think they're me, but I'm not sure, because I've been taught that every thought that comes through my head belongs to me in some way, shape, or form. So it must be me. Who else could it be? I remember in the doctoral program, the whole time I was going through graduate school, I was like waiting for them to teach me, where do thoughts come from?
Yeah.
Where do they come from? What are they, and where do they come from? Unmentioned.
Nobody can answer this question, and it's the same as, where does consciousness come from, right? Or what is consciousness? We don't know, and so especially materialist scientists want to stay away from it.
These things are different. Consciousness is independent of these things, but they do impinge on it greatly.
Agreed.
So I have 2 years into the doctoral program. I'm feeling suffocated. Just absolutely suffocated. All the free time that I've had was taken away. If you didn't brownie some of the professors, they were enemies. And if they found you had any free time at all, they'd take it and pile something more on it. After 2 years, nobody had graduated from that program, and it was supposed to be. They advertised it as one of the best in the country, but nobody had graduated from it.
That's how it makes it so good.
Nobody made it through up to the. So that amazed me in and of itself. So after a lecture on, and now this was an ex-preacher giving this lecture to second-year PhD students in psychology. And here he is teaching us how to lie with statistics and not get caught. And I'm sitting there looking at this, and what he was doing was treating the top 5% of this population as if it were the entire population. And I'm like, wait a minute. This goes against, the 7 stat courses I've had to that point. This doesn't match
And
what I've been taught at all.
and it
So I
goes
raised
against ethics. I mean,
I didn't know, I couldn't conceive that anybody would do that.
yeah.
Especially a PhD professor. It just was inconceivable to me.
Okay, yeah.
Even though I didn't fully trust them, I didn't think they would go that far.
Right.
As to actually teach how to lie
Yeah.
and how to deceive the population that they will be publishing for.
And we have to go back to why, right? Because the real reason why is just to keep their status and their job and their money flowing. That's it, right?
Publish or perish.
All
Yeah.
selfish. There's no thought about how it
Right.
affects people.
And like, okay, you guys go out and you're going to publish stuff, and this is a good way to get published without anybody catching you. And those advanced statistics, I mean, the average academic is not going to be able to sit down and look at what they've done.
Parse it out, yeah.
Yeah, and parse it out, because they don't provide a lot of that information. If you look in the paper, they'll say, "Oh, a study has been done."
Period.
Yeah, especially with Trump. Oh, a study has been done that says Trump is failing, and you look and it was done with all Democrats when you actually look
Yeah.
at, so it's like it was inconceivable, and I raised my hand and I said, well, wait a minute, how could this be? How can you do this?
Yeah.
And I'll never forget his response. It was like, if they're not smart enough to catch it, it's their fault.
Wow.
And my head just went boom.
That's like the root of evil,
It was.
If you can't see me doing this, then it's your fault. I did it to you.
And I'm looking around at all the other students, and they're all glued to looking at this guy like, oh, that's how it's done. Except for one, Tom. I looked at Tom. He was like a hippie guy, kind of like I was. And he's like, he looks at me and he goes, and then we look back because we didn't want him
to know.
Yeah. Oh my God. So that was my first, and he was the head of the department.
Wow.
He was the head of the department. So second year, here he is again. He's giving us a lecture, and he's done with his lecture. And he goes, "Is there any questions over anything?" And I go, "Yeah, I got to come raise my hand." And he goes, "Yeah." I said, "Where do thoughts come from?" And he just stood there like, like, who would ask such a question?
He's like, no, I mean other questions, not that one.
Yeah, but he didn't say that with his mouth. He said it with his face. And he stood there stunned for like probably 10, 15 seconds before he could come up with something. And I didn't realize, I mean, I was wanting the information. I didn't realize that I embarrassed him, because I found out later that you're not supposed to look stupid in front of students. I found that out the hard way. And he said, I'll talk to you after the lecture. So I went up there after the lecture, and he, boom, out of the room. And I went, uh-oh, I'm in trouble.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, and then there was another time where I was the teaching assistant for a group of master students, and the group was going pretty well. When they wanted to know, I'd say, well, okay, this is what a schizophrenic looks like. This is what they act like. This is how you deal with, so I had all this clinical stuff behind me. So the groups were always interesting.
Yeah.
Then the professor comes in, the guy the head of the master's department, comes in one day, and he goes, "I'd like to watch your group." I said, "Yeah, come on in, fine." He sat down, and things were rocking along just fine. And then a student asked me a question that I didn't know the answer to.
Mm.
And I went, well, I don't know. I don't know that answer. I don't know that. And, the group broke up, and he comes over to me and he says, "I want to see you after group. You come to my office." And I'm like, what's this all about? And so I sit down, and he sits down in the chair, and he looks at me and he goes, "Don't you ever tell a student you don't know the answer to something." And I'm like, what?
You're like, but I don't know.
My head is warped. And I'm saying, but I didn't know. You don't tell them that. You say, "You'll find out," or I'll get you in. But some of those questions they didn't have the answers to either,
Well, yeah.
So what I started suspecting was that if that's the case, this guy probably just made up stuff.
Yes.
When he was hit with something, rather than go research it, he probably just made something up, and they didn't know any better. It felt like the the undergraduate stuff again. I mean, they could tell you anything, and you didn't know.
And it's all propped up on like smoke and mirrors and lies. And when you get down to it, like how much of it is actually, built on anything substantial, and for what? And in the reality, it's like the most intelligent people know that they don't know everything. And the most intelligent people are capable of admitting, like, oh, I actually don't know. That's a great question. Maybe we can find out together or whatever it is. And that is also very respectable. And that's how learning should be. No, you shouldn't expect anyone to know everything, right?
Yeah, I mean, you virtually can't. But this goes all the way back to Hippocrates in Greek. Back when he comes out and he goes, well, listen, there's a physical reason for illnesses, and then they started finding some cleanliness and stuff like that, and then it went all the way down the line with the medical profession. So basically, he substantiated it. He declared that virtually all illness has a physical cause. And medical science has taken that an awful long way, because an awful lot of physical illnesses have a physical cause.
Right.
But then when you get into mental illnesses, it just breaks down completely.
Well, and there's even with physical illness, often there's a psycho-spiritual root of them, right? So I've had moments where I've been in great danger, and so I have a huge stress response, and I have crazy things happen to my body, So like here. That, right? And that didn't come from a it's kind of, they're like interactive at the very least, right?
Well, if you go down to it, it's like the shamans say, all illness is spiritually based.
I would put my money there more than anywhere else.
They're saying the spirit gets sick first and the body follows suit.
Right.
But our medical science, the other way around. Spirit does not exist, and you're a machine. And that's how a lot of these doctors treat you, like a broken machine. You go in for surgery, you're a broken machine. But I think at some level, spirit gets sick first.
Right.
But medical profession, it's not that way.
No.
And it goes all the way, like I said, all the way back to Hippocrates. Then when it failed here. Let me see where that listing is. I tried to organize this stuff, but it didn't come out very well. I got to do more organization. So, all the way back to Egyptian days, there were accounts of schizophrenics.
Huh.
Okay.
That's fascinating.
And that was in their papyrus type stuff. It was there. They didn't know what to do about it, but they wrote about it. Hippocrates in 375 BC he comes along and says, well, all illness has a physical cause. And then he started finding some of them, cleanliness, some of the common ones. Okay, and then that just went and went and went until you have medical science today, completely knocking out any spiritual stuff. And that's one thing about psychology all the way through, from undergraduate to master's to PhD. There is no mention of spirit. There is no mention of a soul. It's treated like it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
And I remember when I was starving for spiritual material. So I would have to make room to read Carlos Castaneda and some of these shamanic things. And Castaneda fascinated me, especially when I got into the state hospital, because he was talking about some of the stuff these guys were experiencing, and he didn't actually come out with it until the very end, and you could see him inferring it all the way along in 4 or 5 volumes before he got to the end and actually comes out and says it to Carlos. And it was like a boom, So I checked out some of his basic premises. I mean, I actually did experiments to see if they were true, because I didn't trust him any more than I did anybody else.
Which is good to start from that place, right? But it's also awesome that he was there to help, help inform you or give you something to go off of in order to do further investigation.
So I took what he went off of and actually did an experiment One of the things and I won't tell you the experiment because it took months to think up something so bizarre that I didn't get thrown in jail for it.
Yeah.
But basically what he's saying is when the human being is confronted with an insertion from another reality
Hmm.
and it, boom, appears in front of their eyes, it doesn't fit what they've been programmed to believe, and it causes a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
So you can see that with these people who've seen flying saucers or aliens. I mean, they just
Right.
can't comprehend it, and they're being told, "Oh, they don't exist," and you're whacked, and but they know what they saw.
Right.
And it's the same thing with schizophrenics. They know what they're hearing, they know what they saw, they can carry on conversations with these things. And I've carried on conversations with these things. And Wilson Van Dusen, a clinical psychologist in California, carried on more conversations with them than I did because I had a gut feeling that I'm not supposed to be talking to them a whole lot after
Yeah.
I found out I could. But, so here I come in, not trusting authority, and I'm watching what's happening, and I see psychiatrists not giving any lab work whatsoever before they start administering medications.
Hmm.
So it's only maybe a decade or 2 decades before I got there, they were still using straitjackets, and the attendants, some of the old time attendants would talk about these battles they had with schizophrenics to try to put them in a straitjacket where both sides got hurt.
Yeah.
Uh, so here and that's one thing about the drug companies too. I mean, this pops into mind. So I'm kind of going with flow of consciousness. They're
Yeah.
telling us that they have spent millions and millions of dollars developing these drugs. And that there's all kinds of laboratory tests, and that they got to go through all these trials and get through the federal government. When it comes to psychotropic drugs to treat schizophrenia, they were discovered by accident in a dye factory in France, in Europe, by accident.
Wow.
In a dye laboratory. They found out that their workers were getting sedated from this stuff, and they didn't know why. So they figured, okay, some pharmacists were going, well, we can use this to treat anxiety and what else? They were using it to treat what do you
Like
call rash?
mania.
Rashes. No, that didn't go that far yet.
Oh.
It was like an anesthetic. They were using it
Okay.
for an anesthetic. They were using it uh, to treat. I don't know. It was more like to sedate people down.
Yeah.
And then somebody, one of the French drug companies went, well, this might be useful for a sedative for anesthetic. So they took what this laboratory had. They just went in there, they got the stuff, and they synthesized out of it. No research. I mean, they just took what this dye company had, and they put it, and it did work as an anesthetic, and it did work as a tranquilizer. Discovered by accident.
Yeah.
So at that time, psychoanalysis was a big thing in Europe. It was like, oh yeah, well, we can cure everybody with psychoanalysis, and they had Freud and all this kind of. It was in the late 1800s, and they didn't want to hear anything about drugs. We know what it is. It's the subconscious and the ego and the id, and then they're all screwed up in there, and that's what doing this, and we're the only ones that can straighten it out. So get out of here with your drugs. So this guy, the French company, convinced one of the state hospitals in the U.S. to do a trial on these drugs with schizophrenics, and the results were remarkable.
Hmm.
They were better than they'd ever had since 375 BC.
Wow.
These guys calmed down, and up to that time, it was a big thing of how do we manage these populations? So you have hundreds of psychotics and mentally ill people. It's hard to keep them under control.
Yeah.
So you go through, and so here's the physical thing coming down from Hippocrates. And then you have Emil Kraepelin in 1926, somewhere in there, who says, he's the father of psychiatry. He says, well, all mental illness also has a physical cause. So he goes right down the line there. So, and he publishes all this. the father of psychiatry. Now the problems start. So they start looking for a physical cause, and
their motivation to find it is cash, basically,
well,
right?
to start with, it wasn't cash. It was how do we manage these massive, crazy populations?
Fair, yeah.
So you have thousands of mentally ill people all together here,
But it's difficult enough to manage not mentally ill people.
Right,
So
right.
yeah.
So anything they could use to. So as we go down the line, so here's Kraepelin saying, okay, it's physical, and so what they did is they sterilized 250,000 mentally ill patients. Forced sterilization by 1937. This had taken place.
God.
So yeah, it's a physical cause. We'll stop it because it's physical and it's passed on. So we're going to end mental illness by forcefully sterilizing these people. 250,000 of them were sterilized. Yeah, and then
I've never heard of that.
oh yeah, they won't tell you these things.
Right.
Then in about 1908, a physician, Paul Bueller, a psychiatrist, he pronounced that schizophrenia was a split mind. That's what he named it, schizophrenia. It's a split mind, and they saw that there was a split, but they didn't treat it like one. It didn't like engender any curiosity about what was it that split off. They still saw it as a whole mind, one mind, but some part of it had split off, and or was dysfunctional, and I was programmed with that for years, even though all this information was coming in that was completely contradictory to what they were telling me. I just went, no, this can't be. What I'm seeing can't be. But it just kept repeating over and over and over again. And it's like I denied it well past the point any sane researcher would have, because I didn't, I'm like, oh, this can't be. Yeah. So then it was back I think in the 30s somewhere, they came up with their Dictionary of Statistical Mental Health, DSM, Diagnostic and System.
The Bible of
their Bible.
Yeah.
So I think it started out with something like 37 mental illnesses, and now it's up into the hundreds. And they're all made up, every single one of them.
There's so many that are so similar to each other that I'm like, if you look into the symptoms of PTSD, for example, they're really similar to the symptoms of ADHD, and they're really similar to symptoms of anxiety, and they're really similar to symptoms of depression. And I'm like, this is all so similar. I get that it helps to be nuanced in some cases, but isn't there something else going on? I don't know.
Oh yeah, there's a lot else going on.
Right.
So all the DSM does is saying, okay, we agree that these are categories.
Okay.
That all of those of us who are working the front line, supposedly, working with patients, we've seen these categories, and they all sit down, and I don't know how many of them there are, but for the power that this DSM thing, they've got to wield. I mean, every single one of those diagnoses cannot be tested scientifically. There's no test for them. There's no lab work for them. There is no EEG thing to show anything. Every single one of them is made up.
Yeah.
So it started with 37, and I think last it was like 267 or up in the 300. I mean, every year they were making up more and more and more. And I'm watching, and that's one of the things in the doctoral program. They wanted you to memorize this damn thing. And I'm like, come off it. What is wrong with you people? Don't you understand what is going? No, they didn't understand what was going on. Yeah, and that was one of the first things I saw with psychiatry. They had no tests. They would look at the guy, they'd talk to him for 10 or 15 minutes, and they go, well, okay, let's try you on this drug. They put them on it for a week or 2 weeks. They call them back. And at the state hospital, the most time they ever spent working with them was 15, 20 minutes. Yeah. And, they'd say, well, how's your drugs working for you? Well, they suck. I'm still hearing the voices. Okay, well, let's give you another dose. And, that reminds me of something I started earlier, is what these guys go through before they ever get to that point. So you have somebody walking around, the kid in a family starts hearing voices for one reason or other. There's several reasons why that started. Sexual abuse, nasty sexual, physical, emotional abuse will draw these things in. Amphetamine is like a magnet. It is like a friggin' magnet. It will just pull them in out of the universe, and they just, hey man, it's like opening the floodgates.
Yeah,
I've seen more prisoners go psychotic on amphetamine and not come back than any other reason.
Isn't that crazy? I've said the same thing for years, that like out of all, I've done a lot of drugs in my life. I had a hard past and I'm better now. But amphetamines, being around people on amphetamines and watching them, it was literally like you were watching people become demonic, and it was like their soul was just gone.
That's exactly what happens.
It's crazy that I don't know why it's true with amphetamines and not as much with other drugs. I think every drug probably has something of that, but I don't know why methamphetamines are so good at it.
Well, the prisoners called it the devil's drug.
Really?
That's what they named it.
Wow.
Yeah, among themselves, there's thousands, just on their own, thousands of prisoners. You say the devil's drug, they know exactly what you're talking about.
That's crazy.
And I'm getting diverted from the experience of what somebody just first being psychotic experiences before they get to this point, but we're kind of running on the amphetamines now.
Yeah, we'll jump back.
But people need to know that too.
Mm-hmm.
So what these guys experience is, first, it speeds them up, and they're like, oh man, like Superman, this is great, I can get all this stuff done, and they feel like Superman. They don't sleep. Then eventually they start seeing the shadow people.
Yes,
these are
shadow people,
three-dimensional shadows that appear at night. They walk through walls. They're darker than the rest of the room. They see them in the daytime too. Mm-hmm. You probably have experienced them.
I've seen other people seeing them. I seem to have been protected myself.
Yeah. I've seen them out of the corner of my eye. But here's hundreds and hundreds of prisoners, and I worked for 10 years in ERs, doing psych crisis in ERs, and hundreds of tell me the same story.
Yeah,
you feel like Superman, you're doing this, you can get all this stuff done, you feel great, and then you crash. And then you're depressed for days and you feel like crap, and then you do it again. Eventually they start seeing the shadow people, and that they don't know what those are. Three-dimensional shadows, often in the shape of a human, but not always. Sometimes they're like little elves or demons. Sometimes they're animals. Sometimes they're monsters. Most of them don't see the eyes. You ask them, well, do you see the eyes? Do you see the face? Most of them just see a head. Some of them wearing a hat or a cape, which is weird.
Yeah, they do often have capes and hats.
Yeah,
it's weird.
That struck me as odd. I mean, it's like, okay, what is this? What are these things? But they never seem to cause any. They scared the hell out of these people, but they never seem to cause any physical damage. They would often wake up and hear these things are standing over them, looking down at them while they're in their bed, which freaks them out.
Yeah.
or they're sitting around and they see one walking across or come through the wall or something like that. And then I found out, I just kept asking them, well, what did you see? What did you see? Describe it. Some of them started seeing the eyes. And that was rare. Yeah. But the ones who saw the eyes were the ones who were much worse off.
Okay.
They were using amphetamine for a much longer period of time in greater doses. So I actually used it as a diagnostic tool. If they saw the eyes, then they were in worse shape than the ones who didn't see the eyes.
Interesting. That's fascinating. Because there's that whole thing where the eyes are the portal to the soul, and like, if you're making eye contact with a demon, then you're probably worse off than.
Well, I did steer one down. I mean, that was intense. That's a whole different story. But that was a shadow person. But the eyes were always described as lime green or red. Not good colors for eyes.
No.
So once the eyes appeared, then they would start hearing the voices. Right? And they would come periodically, and they'd hear them, and they'd go, "Oh, that's just a hallucination." And they go, "Oh yeah, yeah, I'll just blow it off." And then when they come down, the voice has disappeared, and that kind of seemed to verify that that was a hallucination.
Mm.
No, that wasn't. That's the start of the psychotic process. So they'd go do it again, and then they'd hear the voices again, and then they'd go, "Oh, that's only a hallucination." And then the more they did it, the more the voices came, and that might have gone on for months until one day the voices didn't go away, and they were stuck with them for the rest of their life. They were now as psychotic as any lunatic found in the bedlam. They're
Right.
as crazy as anybody else. And now they have to take those antipsychotic drugs which rot out their peripheral nervous system.
Which have no basis in any scientific testing except let's
Oh,
just
no, they
let's
work.
just throw this at this person and see
Well,
what the effect is.
Well, that's how they start off with that. But those drugs work to reduce the symptoms.
So
Okay.
the people do report that their symptoms are better.
Yes. In most cases, the voices, a lot of times, most of the time, don't completely go away, but they're not as strong. Now, if they can catch it early enough and hit them with these antipsychotics, the voices can't get a grip. But in most cases, they're more subdued. It's kind of like getting a charging rhino, and shooting it in the butt with a big tranquilizer gun.
Yeah.
And it falls over and it's laying there like trying to get up. But soon as that tranquilizer wears off, man, that thing gets up and bam, it's right at you again. And that's exactly what happens with schizophrenics. Soon as they stop taking those meds, and and I wondered for years why they did that. Why are they choosing to go psychotic again when psychosis was as close to hell on earth as I could see?
Right.
And there were a number of reasons for that. But yeah, as soon as they stop taking, one of the biggest is the side effects.
They're really bad.
Bad. They're not as bad as being psychotic. And so it's kind of like, they have a choice.
Yeah.
Do you want a case of the flu, or do you want the bubonic plague?
Yeah.
They're both bad.
They're both bad.
They're both they're both really bad. But one is really, really bad. And they were consistently choosing that one, which flew in the face of everything I had learned in experimental psychology. Any sentient organism will avoid pain and seek pleasure.
Right. A reduction of pain.
Not these guys. Not these guys. They're choosing the worst scenario. And you ask them, I mean, for years, I was asking them, why? Why do you do this? Why do you do this? I started asking psychiatry and psych nurses, why do they keep going off their meds? Why are they choosing to go insane? Completely. Why are they going off their meds? And it boggled my mind. I remember one psych nurse said, well, that's just a symptom of their illness. That's just the way they are. And I'm like, oh,
why?
Why? Oh, that's just the way they are. That they've always been that way. They've always been that way now, and they'll always be that way. That's just the way they are. I'm like, oh my God, but why are they that way? They weren't asking those questions. It's like, and psychiatry, they'd go, well, they don't like them because of this. But there was an interesting thing that I saw going on when I first got to the state hospital, and I couldn't explain it. Psychiatrists were being attacked by these patients at a rate like 2 to 3 times higher than any other staff member. That includes psychologists, medical doctors, psych nurses, counselors, psychologists.
And these aren't the people that they have the most contact with, which would increase the rate. It's
the attendants that are around them 24 hours a day are attacked at just very slightly higher rate than psychiatrists are.
So
and they're adjust for 24 hours a day.
Right.
And the state psychiatrists are there 15, 20 minutes. How's your meds? Okay, we're going to increase them. and that's all the time they're spending with them, and they're being attacked at a rate 2 to 3 times higher, 4 times higher than attendants who are around them 24 hours a day. And I'm like,
Hmm.
what's happening there?
Yeah.
What are psychiatrists doing to piss these guys off in 20 minutes that
Right.
are resulting in an attack rate 3 to 4 times higher than any other staff?
Wow.
And I'm like, what's going on with that? Nobody answered. Nobody knew. The underlying rule in the state hospital was you don't do anything to upset psychotic patients. And I was breaking that rule by asking them about their voices because they got upset sometimes. The voices got upset sometimes.
Hmm.
And I got in trouble with psychiatry more than once for asking them about their voices and what they were telling them and what they were doing and what they were saying and how they were reacting to things. And um, twice they went to psychiatrists and they told them that I was irritating them by asking them about their voices. And boy, I got called up on the red carpet. You do not do anything to upset these patients. I got enough trouble. I don't need you upsetting patients. You're making them worse. You're reinforcing their hallucinations by asking them questions about them. You're making them wrong, and you're making the patients worse. And I'm like, well, wait, that's not what I've seen. Who's the doctor, me or you? And I'm like, oh God,
And in
yes,
reality,
sir.
yeah. And in reality, it's they're clearly identifying the possible sources of like a relief from, or however you want to phrase that, right? Like the voices seem to be identifying what it is that's going to stop them from being effective with their target, right?
Well,
Which is you and
that
medication.
that's turned out to be exactly right. They were attacking the psychiatrist because of the medication.
Mhm.
Not because of anything the psychiatrists were saying to him. And the psychiatrists were real touchy because they're getting attacked for saying very little to these guys, and trying to get information out of them about how the drugs are working. And here I'm trying to get information out of them about what the voices are saying and how they work and how the patterns they run. So
Mhm.
they're going, well, you know, I think in the back of their minds, they're thinking, well, if I'm being attacked by just asking them how they're doing with their meds, you're really going to stir them up by asking that kind of stuff. So you
Right.
stop it now.
Mhm.
So boy, I had to stay under the radar on that for a long time. Um, but yeah, the I don't know if we finished with the shadow people. Um, when later years when I got to the prison, um, I talked to one prisoner who told me about an experiment he ran with the shadow people. And man,
Mm.
I was all ears,
Yeah.
because I'd never seen them myself.
Mhm.
It was all, firsthand information from people who had experienced them. And here's somebody who's curious enough to do an experiment with them. And I was all ears. I'm like,
Yeah.
tell me about this. Tell me.
Mhm.
So this happened in Arizona. Before he got to prison, he was using a lot of meth, and he had a friend who was using a lot of meth, and they were both seeing the shadow people. And their question is do you have to be on meth to see them?
Mm.
So what they did is they got in their pickup truck. They got meth. I think they were injecting it, and they
Oh.
went out to an Indian reservation way out in the middle of the desert at night. Drove up this dirt road at night and stopped and parked. And one of them injected the meth and the other one didn't. So he's standing there,
Huh.
and he goes, "Okay, I see one. There he is over there. You see him by the tree?" And the other guy goes, "No, no, I don't see him." He goes, "Well, there's another one. He's over by that rock. You see him?" And, "No, I don't see him either." So
Wow.
they came to the determination that they needed to be on the meth, at least in this case, to see him. So
Wow.
after this first guy saw a bunch and this other guy didn't see any, he shot up also. Now their question was, are we seeing the same ones?
Well, I
Or
love this experiment.
I was fascinated. I was like,
Yeah.
wow, man, I would have done that if I could have.
Mhm.
And the other guy shot up, and then they're going, yeah, here's one over there. You see him? Yeah, I see him. Oh, well, what's he doing? Tell me what he's doing. Well, he's doing this. And after doing that for a while, they came to the conclusion that they were both seeing the same thing.
See,
They
that's
were both seeing
insane.
the same shadow people. And I'm like, wow, listen to this. And what I'd known is what the prisoners told me is that when the shadow people see them paying attention to them, and the prisoners called them the tree people because they saw them sitting in the trees all the time in the shadows of the trees. They
Huh.
could clearly see them up there. But almost all of them told me is when they paid attention to them and they stared at them, they started moving in on them.
Mm.
They started coming toward them. And
Isn't
that was,
that funny that there's that idea like when you stare at the abyss, it stares back? This
I
is
never
kind of
thought
like that
about that,
idea.
but that, but not only stares back, it
It comes for you, yeah.
comes for them. So it was coming. And that was enough to scare most of them off.
Hmm.
They stopped looking and they just went on their way. Uh,
Wow.
but these guys, no, so here they are with all these shadow people. Both of them shot up in the middle of this Indian reservation on a dirt road, 60 miles from anywhere
Yeah.
where nobody is. And here's a whole ring of shadow people all around them. And they're
Wow.
all closing in on them.
Yikes.
And they're like, holy shit. They got in the truck and locked the doors. So, and then they watched them from the truck. And I'm like, well, they must have known that these things can go through,
Anything.
anything.
Yeah.
But why are they feeling safe locking themselves in the truck?
Yeah.
But they were drugged up, and who knows what they were thinking. But
Right. Right.
I'm glad they were at least
Yeah.
thinking this much. And then they said the back of the truck went down like a giant boulder hit it. The
Whoa.
truck recoiled. They went bam, and the front went up. And they turned around, and he said they saw the whole back of the truck was loaded with shadow people.
Wow.
And I'm like, uh-oh. For me, it was like, I thought these things were something like ghosts. I didn't
Right.
think they had any weight. I mean, how could
Physical.
they affect physical reality if they could go through it? How could they do that? And something in the back of my mind was like red light, red light. If they can do that, what else can they do?
Yeah.
And I asked the guy, I said, well, what'd you do? And he goes, well, we started the truck and got out of there. We almost wrecked it getting out of there. And I asked him, did they follow you? Did they stay in the back of the truck? And he said, no. And I'm like, wow, man, heavy.
Why? So literally, yeah. Wow.
Uh,
Yeah, that is fascinating because I would have also had the same idea that they wouldn't be physical, but it makes sense given some other experiences that I've had where physical objects move, and that maybe, and I've always wondered if like the amount of attention you give it also can affect like how powerful it can kind of interact with you or not. So
well,
that would
depends
also
on whether it's fear or not. If it's fear, it
interesting.
feeds it.
Right.
Now, I
Good
have
point.
talked to patients where they felt these things walk through them.
Ugh.
They saw them walk through them. And I asked them if they could feel it, and they said definitely they could feel it.
Yeah.
But they never seemed to try to possess them.
Mhm.
They never seemed to physically threaten them. They never spoke, except for I did meet one patient in the ER on Christmas Eve who came in, and this guy had been injecting meth for 10 years.
Ugh.
He had spoken to them.
Wow.
That was a terrifying story. I don't know. You want that story?
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. Oh. He comes in, and there wasn't a lot of, I hated being there Christmas Eve, but somebody had to man the ER. So somebody had to have a coverage for psych crisis. And this guy comes in, and they brought him back out of the medical part of the ER and put him in the psych annex, and he's shaking like a leaf. He's just like this all the time. The whole time he's sitting there shaking like a leaf. Seemed fairly personable, brought him in and, started talking to him. He said he's been using meth, and then I found out he's been injecting for 10 years, and I'm going, he should have been dead 6 years ago.
Seriously. Yeah.
He shouldn't be alive right now. So I'm going, this is a very different case. Why is this guy still alive?
Yeah.
And others who have done the same thing, the majority of them are long gone. Why is this guy still alive? So here's this in my head again, like what's going on here?
Yeah.
And it's something that just kicks in, and it goes, find out what's going on.
It's a puzzle, yeah.
and I can't. Yeah, it's a puzzle, and it's like my wife works these jigsaw puzzles, and she just goes, that would drive me crazy. But when something like this comes up, it's like boom. Hey, how's this fit? Where's this go? It's like, how does this all mesh? And what, how
Right.
does this mesh? It's like boom. It's like this giant computer goes in, and like, how does this all fit in? And this was something that was way on out there. It was a piece that was way, way on out there. And it's like, here it comes. And I'm like, what the hell do I do with this? So I started talking to him, and I was sure he saw the shadow people. I said, you've seen the shadow people? He goes, yeah. And I said, did you see their eyes? He goes, oh, yeah, I see their eyes all the time. And I said, and I always ask this because I'm thinking, do they speak? And 99% of the time, these guys would say they didn't. This guy said they did. He said they spoke to him. And I'm like, well, that's really unusual. So next thing I want to know, well, what are they saying? So I asked him, I said, what did they sound like? And he mimics this high-pitched, squeaky voice that just gave me the shudders. It was like, it was just that's eerie, high-pitched, squeaky voice, and it just made me shudder just to listen to it. It was weird. And and I asked him, I said, well, what did they tell you? And he said, they told me to go jump in front of traffic and that I would be okay. And right after he said that, it was like this other world. I mean, he was shaking from the time he walked into the yard, just trembling. He went perfectly calm. Perfectly calm. And he's looking at me in the eye, and his eyes get black, just like these dark pools. And I felt this intense, cold hatred.
Wow.
Just staring at me, and it was like solid. And the feeling I got is, I'd rather cut your gut open and spill your guts all over this room than answer another question from you.
Wow.
But one thing I'd learned over all these years is you can't show any fear. You can't, even if you can't show it.
That's key.
So I'm sitting there staring this thing in the eye, and it seemed like forever. It's like I'm looking at it and it's looking at me, and I can feel this intense hatred. I mean, it's the most intense hatred I've ever felt in my life. It's cold hatred. And then boom, it disappears, and he's back to shaking again, and his eyes go back to normal, and he's normal.
Does he even know? Did he have an awareness that had just happened?
I don't know. I was so shaken up. I didn't know. I didn't think about even asking him.
I feel
the next question on, it was like, I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
And he's back to normal. So this thing ain't looking at me anymore, but it is, but it's not like that. And I'm like, I'm trying to shake that off. And the next thing that comes into mind is like, well, what did they tell him?
Yeah.
And I'm kind of going, part of me's going, you're going to go back there to find out what they told him? And this other part's going, yeah, we're going back there. This other part's going, oh, no,
I don't want to
I'm
ever
not
see
going
that
back
again.
there. This other part's going, yeah, you are. You're coming with me, God damn it. And I'm like, oh, shit. So I asked him, I said, well, what was it that they told you? And I wanted to find out what happened. He already said they asked him to jump in front of a truck, and he had his arms, legs. He wasn't limping or anything like that. And I said, well, what did you do when they told you that? And he said, I jumped in front of a truck. And I said, you get hit? And he said, yeah, I got hit and I got knocked across the road. I was in the gutter on the other side. And I said, well, what happened? And he said, they were standing all around me as I came to. And they said, get up, you're not hurt. And he said, I got up and I wasn't hurt. And I'm like, wow. And then he said they told him to do it again. And he did it again with the same result. And after that, it was like, I don't want to risk this thing coming back. It came back a second time after that. So I had to deal with it twice. But after that, that's all I could deal with it. I mean, it was like when I went to ask another question after what happened, there they were again. Yeah. So, here was this eerie stare down contest. And after that, it's like, I can't take this anymore. I just can't deal with this is enough. I don't know what the hell this is. It ain't human. No. And it comes out there and I don't know what the hell it's going to do. I mean, it's kept this guy alive, 6-8 years longer than he should be. And I don't know what I'm messing with here. So, I'm going to, okay, get out of here. And I committed him. I mean, you're going in.
Yeah.
You're going in, buddy. And then the psych nurse comes in 5 minutes later and she goes, "What'd you get out of him? I can't deal with him at all." She goes, I can't even talk to him. And she wrote down all my notes. And I said, yeah, he was an eerie fella. Yeah.
You're very, very brave. You're braver than I think
Brave
most
or
people.
stupid, one or the other.
Well, look what you've been able to bring back because of that, right? Is all this information that helps, I think, you and everyone else that you're able to share it with understand what's actually going on here. But I can't understand what these entities or demons or whatever you want to call them get out of keeping him alive, because my idea might have been that they would be like, jump in front of this truck, you won't get hurt, and then he gets hurt really badly, and all that suffering and fear and anger is something that maybe they like feed off of. But what do they get out of him not suffering? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know what you mean. Now if he was a prisoner, I could have looked into his records and seen, but there was no medical record on this guy. We were starting it. But you look back in the prisoners' records and you can see all the trouble they got into.
Yeah.
Now these things feed off of fear and negative emotion. So that's what they want to generate, and that's what they drain.
Yeah.
And that's what most people don't understand. I don't know whether should we go back to what a new schizophrenic experience is as they come through this.
Yeah, let's go back and bring it back.
Because we kind of went back there 3, 4, and then got sidetracked. So yeah, they're walking along, and all of a sudden they hear this voice in their head that doesn't sound like their normal content. So it may sound like the thought, like we all have somebody speaking to us in our head all the time.
Right.
Here's this voice in our head telling us what to do, what to go, where to go, what to think, it's constantly prattle, 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 prattle. And you're used to it. You kind of know what that thought stream is like. And everybody thinks that that's who they are.
Yeah.
That's not true.
That's not true. That's absolutely.
We're kind of taught that you are your thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a friend of mine who's an engineer. I mean, he's a missile engineer, a rocket scientist. And I said, do you think you are your thoughts? And he goes, yeah, I do. There's no telling him. But then you look and you see, okay, if you can step back and you can listen to that voice prattling in your head, then who's the listener?
Yes. And you can experience that. If you really get quiet and you really sit with it, you can experience it. And it's one of the most profound experiences that you can have, I think. I'm sure you can have more profound experiences, but it's like at least one of these that can kind of start you into realizing exactly what you're talking about, that there's something behind all of that, then that is what you are. Yeah.
So here's this prattle, but you're the listener.
Right.
So here's this prattle trying to convince you of who you are and what you are. But that listener is not the same as the prattle.
But you're identifying with all of that.
You're identifying.
Yeah.
There was another one, like, what was the other thing? It was, who's the listener? And then there was another one where it just brings it out real clear. I forgot what, maybe it'll come. But yeah, that's one thing that's key to understanding schizophrenics, is that those voices do not belong to them.
Yeah.
And like our thoughts do not belong to us. And Emanuel Swedenborg, a Christian mystic, said none of your thoughts belong to you. They come in from other places. Like a radio station, you tune into that station.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's what you pick up. And schizophrenics are tuned into a very dark station, and there's something that doesn't want them to change the dial.
Doesn't want them to even realize that it's not them, right? Because it would be so difficult, especially if you're in a place where you still haven't realized that you're not your thoughts, and then those thoughts start coming through and you think that is you. How difficult would it be to try to stop that or change it in any way? Very, very difficult. Right. First they're confused. So okay, here's their normal thought stream that's been like that for years. I mean, a lot of them have suffered, like I said, extreme physical, emotional, sexual abuse. And then you got the drug guys. So their lives haven't been very pleasant, to start with, and they've attracted a lot of negative stuff. And once you're on that, you're looking for it, and then you're attracting more. Then all of a sudden, here comes these thoughts that are worse
than your normal thoughts, and their intention is not yours.
Yeah.
Like the thought might tell them, well, they're standing on a bridge, and the thought might say, well, why don't you jump? Or they're driving in traffic, and the thought might say, hey, what would happen if you just swerved over into the other lane?
Yeah.
Stuff like that. And the intent is very different than what their normal thought stream is. And then they're kind of going, well, okay, what is this? I don't think it's me, because it's very dark. It's telling me to do things that I know will get me in trouble. I've listened to them before, and I've gotten in trouble before. I don't think they're me. And a lot of them will just go ask the voices, like, who are you? And you know what they say?
What do they say?
We are you.
We.
We are you. They want them to think that the voices are who they are. Now, if they can convince them of that, then you got these guys with the AK-47s, mowing down people out in the middle of nowhere. It's not that gun they're killing people. It's these voices that have taken control of this guy. And then they go, oh yeah, take away the guns. I mean, you look at friggin' Detroit, they got more gun laws than Carter has liver pills. I mean, it's so intense with laws, and they have the highest shooting rate of anywhere in the United States.
And the United Kingdom has the highest murder rate per capita, and they have no guns either.
Yeah, now they've
just
turned to knives and everything else.
Now they're going to outlaw knives, and then people are going to use whatever else because it's not about the weapon.
No, it's not. The deep state wants us disarmed.
Yes.
So you can't fight back. Yeah. And they're using this as a thing. They're not saying, hey, we need to have a better mental health system. No, we need to get rid of the guns. And even though the evidence is
we need to defund the mental health system, in fact, so that we have more people. And I don't know how deep you go, but there's also this idea that they intentionally break people's psyches, so that these, I think, entities can come through and then cause this sort of chaos more easily.
MK Ultra and those guys. You got the CIA into all kinds of nefarious stuff. But it gets bizarre.
So then I wanted to ask you if when these voices are coming through and they're, clearly of this darker nature, and they're trying to make people believe that this is them, and maybe people start to distrust that or wonder if it really is them, or why is this voice trying to get me to hurt people or do these things? But isn't there something that they can try to kind of convince people that they have like insight or power because they can know things that the person wouldn't already normally know, and that maybe will convince people to like trust them maybe or something?
Well, that happens. It happens. It doesn't happen frequently, but it happens enough to know that it happens. And I got a lot of stories about that where they told the patient stuff that they could not have known.
See, that
they could not have known.
Key for people to understand that there is something going on here that is outside of this person.
Oh yeah. Right. Okay, I'm going to go into a couple of stories since this is where we're led, but remind me to go back to the experiences of what the new guys.
Okay.
Remember, we tried to get there like 5 times. We keep drifting off to these other interesting things. So one of the most interesting of those stories was a guy that I worked with in the prison. He was a prisoner. He'd been psychotic for decades. He was as curious about his voices as I was. And what I was doing there was experimenting with different ways to disrupt them. How can you disrupt them and weaken them? And there was a lot of stuff that happened with that as I was experimenting. But he did recover fully. Wow. We got rid of the voices. He relapsed once, going back after like 3 weeks. He was like, where are the voices? I've heard them almost all my life, and I haven't heard them for 3 weeks. So he went back looking for them.
Wow.
And they came back, and he asked them, who are you? And they said, we'll show you who we are. And they attacked him all night.
Wow.
I mean, all night. He got no sleep. I went and looked him up because he didn't show up for his appointment, and he looked awful. They said, we'll show you who we are. And they just drained him to where he couldn't even get out of bed, and they told him, we will show you who we are.
We again.
Again. you know.
So he
So
kind of invited them back in almost.
he invited them back in.
Mm.
And I had one guy who actually went back because he got lonely. So we got rid of his voices, and he was a loner. He was a fairly docile guy. That's another interesting story. But when I got transferred to another unit, I checked in on him just to see how he was doing, and he said I invited him back. I was just too lonely. I couldn't live without him.
Oh.
But this fellow I was telling you about, one story he told me was that he was in San Diego. He was using a lot of drugs. The voices were pretty strong. He was in trouble with the law. He had $250, and the voices told him to take his $250, get 2 burlap bags, and drive up to, they said, we know where there's a Sesame pot field in Oregon. I mean, that's hundreds of miles from San Diego. So they told him, get 2 burlap bags, get your money, and we'll show you where it is. And he trusted them. A lot of them trust them, but they do provide result, but it's always to the detriment of the person in the long
run. End.
Right. So yeah, in the end. So he gets his bag, he fills up his tank, and he drives up to Oregon, and they're telling him turn by turn where to go, all the way down like these little roads.
Google Maps without Google Maps.
Yeah, without Google Maps. Yeah. And then he goes down this 23-mile dirt road, and it ends up at the base of this mountain, and he has the voices. Well, there's no more road. What do I do now? They said, well, get out of the car, take your burlap bags. There's a hiking trail off to the left. Follow it up about 3 miles, and you'll see what we're talking about. So he gets the burlap bag, goes up there, and here's this giant Sesame pot field, a giant. And he goes up there, and he cuts them down, fills the 2 burlap sacks, comes back down the mountain, throws them in his trunk. And he goes, well, okay, what do I do now? And they said, well, we know a park where you can sell them. So they tell him where this park is, and he goes out there and he sells this stuff. Apparently it's pretty good stuff, and he makes a small fortune, and he buys all the prostitutes he can handle. Wow. He buys all the liquor he can handle. He buys all the cocaine he wants. And what amazed me is these voices were fishermen. They wanted to go fishing. And I'm like, what? Yeah, they wanted to go fishing. He said, we went out to the Columbia River, and he said, I was the only one catching fish. He said, they told me where to throw the hook, how long to be there, and when to move on. Wow. And he said, I could see everybody else. They weren't catching anything, and I was pulling them in one after another. And I'm like, this is bizarre.
Wow. And, it's like they want to pretend to be Jesus. We'll feed you with our fish or whatever.
I don't know. I never thought about it that way, but I was like, a fisherman. They want to be fishermen. They want to fish. They enjoy fishing. I'm like, what?
What?
And he goes, yeah, honest to God. And what was interesting with this guy was that I worked with him over 6 months, his deceased mother would come through every once in a while, and I was suspicious of that.
Yeah.
Because a lot of times they'll take the form of somebody like that and then, tell them stuff. And one thing they do is they have access. They have complete access to your entire memory. Yeah. So they can pull up anything that you got in there.
Which is really convincing.
Yes, to you. Exactly. Yeah. Make it really convincing. So I'm like really suspicious. And I kept asking him every time he told me his mother showed up, what did she say? And he like, don't wear dirty underwear, wash your clothes, don't hang around with drug addicts, go to school, and, all that stuff. And it never changed. It was never anything negative. And I'd ask him anything negative at all. No. That was interesting. And then he'd say when the weaker voices came, his mother would show up and scare him away. But when his stronger ones came, she took off. Wow. So I found that interesting.
It is interesting.
That's the first time I've ever heard of that. After he recovered, he said, my mother wants to talk to you. And I said, well, okay, what does she have to say? And she said, thank you for helping me. Oh. And I said, well, you're welcome. I said, what are you doing over there? And she says, I'm checking people in, and I'm like, I went to ask her another question, and she said, everything you need to know is in the Bible. And she shut up.
Wow.
And that was it. I couldn't get anything else out of her.
So maybe it really was her then.
Oh, I think it was.
Wow.
Because
I would be suspicious like you to think that maybe it was them pretending to be her, but she sounds like she was doing pretty good.
The voices would never say anything like that.
That positive, right. Interesting.
Matter of fact, that's one of the first things I noticed at the state hospital was that the ones who tried to read the Bible, the voices got stronger.
Huh.
They didn't go to the religious gatherings where the preacher would have cake and ice cream. That was like primo stuff at the state hospital.
Yeah.
Everybody went for that, except the schizophrenics. I'd notice on my ward that none of the schizophrenics went for that. And I started asking them questions and found out they didn't like the Bible. They didn't like preachers. And that the voices would react negatively to anything like that, any kind of religious anything. And I'm like, why would they do that? Why would a hallucination do that?
Yeah.
And it was consistent.
Because they know exactly what can do them harm.
Yeah, it's like the opposite. And we never did get to get back to the people coming in.
Yeah,
so,
let's go back.
so here they start hearing voices, and there's three things that happen. Is some of them come to the realization that those voices are not who they are, but they don't know what they are.
Mm-hmm.
And they know that they're tormenting them, but they know they're separate. Those are the guys who are in the best shape.
They're easiest to help.
They're not blaming themselves. They haven't bought the lie that they have a broken brain and that their situation is hopeless and that there's nothing they can do about it, that it's not them, it's whatever this thing is that they don't understand what it is. Then you got the guys in the middle who don't know. They're kind of halfway, well, I don't think it's me, but the psychiatrist is telling me that my brain is broken and I don't know what to believe, and maybe my brain is broken and maybe it's not, and they're confused about what's going on. And then the very worst off of those three groups are the ones who've bought into what psychiatry and the psychiatric mafia has told them, that they are broken, that there is no cure, that they're hopeless, that the only thing they can do is take these neurotoxic medications for the rest of their life and pay them for not only appointments every month, but then they have to pay for the prescription. Which, I mean, you talk about the mafia, the psychiatric mafia. I'm in Tucson, Arizona. So 60 miles south of here is the Mexican border. You can go across the border into a Mexican pharmacy and buy antipsychotic drugs at a very small fraction of the cost made by the same companies as here in the U.S. for $35-$40 for a month's supply. Wow. Here you're paying $750 to $800, mostly coming out of taxpayer money for county hospitals or private insurance, driving the cost of healthcare into the stratosphere. And you can do this without a prescription, because nobody in their right mind would take these drugs.
Them, yeah.
Nobody would take them. They're awful. They're not abusable.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to take them. Nobody will take them. Even if they need to take them, they won't take them. Yeah. But here's psychiatry going, oh, no, we need to prescribe it because we know what the deal is. And who knows? They might overdose and take more. They could do that with aspirin. I mean, it's right. Mind-boggling what these people are doing. So you have to, unlike in Mexico where you can walk in and come out with $35, you got a month's supply. Here in the U.S., you got to make a psychiatry appointment. And those guys are dishing out meds like candy. So you can't get in there. I mean, you got to wait weeks to see these guys because they're dishing out all these antidepressants and anti-anxiety, and they're drugging down the population. They're busy doing that and not taking care of the mentally ill people. Yeah. So here they are psychotic for weeks before they can get in to see the psychiatrist. You just can't walk in there, and they're in trouble, and they're getting in trouble, and they're doing bizarre things, and they're hurting people, and they're struggling, waiting to get in to see one of these bozos. And then when they get there, it's like, oh, yeah, we'll give you this antipsychotic medication. I'll make an appointment in a month and see how you're doing. All right. So they're paying $150, $200 for that stupid appointment for this nonsense. Yes. And then they have to go to the pharmacy. And if they don't have insurance, they're paying another $700, $800 for a month's supply of these same drugs you could get across the border for $35. Wow. It's the biggest friggin' scam in the universe. Yeah. But that's the way they have taught the U.S. population. You have to go through us, especially for these drugs. I mean, that nobody wants. Yeah. Nobody wants, they're not abusable. Nobody in their right mind would take these things. And even insane people won't take these things. They won't take them. Nobody wants them. Why are these guys keeping such a grip? Other than the money, the drug companies are making $3.6 billion a year selling these neurotoxic medicines that rot out the peripheral nervous system.
Ugh,
They don't want a cure.
no.
They're on a gravy train, and the psychiatrists are right there with them, making up all these fake illnesses that they put in their DSM-3s, and then the friggin' pharmacies come along behind the drug makers and go, oh yeah, we got a drug for this thing. Yeah, we can cure anything with these drugs.
Like,
yeah, come on. Yeah,
handing out drugs.
Hand out drugs. They're drugging down the entire population. You look at the TV commercials. Oh yeah, there's a Forciba and there's Exexa and mystery drug and ask your doctor for a prescription. Yeah, he'll tell you. Yeah. So they're telling these guys to ask the doctors who don't know shit about what it's insane. It's insane.
Insanity.
And then 2 months, 6 months later, they're being sued for the damages these drugs do. And here they are saying, oh yeah, we got all this rigorous research that we've years and years of research to get these drugs. And a lot of times they're just changing one or two molecules and calling it something else. And it's a gravy train. They've got it just makes me furious. Just it's nuts what they're doing to the people.
So disgusting.
To the people. And they don't know any better. People don't know any better. They don't know what's going on.
No, they're like desperate for help in this most vulnerable position. And this is all they have to go to is that lack of help. It's the opposite of help.
So that's what the new guys are facing coming in.
Yeah.
So here they got this thing. They're being told after they visit. Well, first they tell their friends, and their friends are going, well, I don't hear voices. You're weird. You're possessed. They can't talk about them because the friends disappear.
Yeah. People don't know what to do.
People don't know, and the voices are telling them not to trust anybody. Your friends are cheating on you. Your boyfriend's cheating on you. Your girlfriend's cheating on you. Your parents don't have your best interest. I mean, they're telling them all this negative stuff about all the people around them. Not to trust them. They're trying to break off those contacts. So they tell the parents, and the parents said, well, there's something wrong with you. We got to take you to a psychiatrist. They go into the psychiatrist. Psychiatrist say, oh yeah, you're hearing voices. You're crazy. Okay, you're psychotic. You're schizophrenic. You got to here. We got these medicines. You got to take them every day. And you come back in a month. Well, they take those things and make them feel like crap. Yeah. They all these nasty side effects. Dry mouth, sexual dysfunction. I mean, just as pages of nasty side effects. Yeah. So they're kind of going, oh, I hate this crap. So they go in the next month. They go, the voices have got less, but this stuff's awful. I can't stand it. What else you got? Oh well, we got this one. We got these atypical antipsychotics now that have less side effects. Okay, but they're more expensive. Mm-hmm. Oh, hey, we'll try this one, and I mean it's one after the other, and there's no test. It's all objective, subjective stuff. How do you feel? Well, I still hear, well, let's increase your medicines. And they're being told there is no cure. There is no cure. We don't have a cure. We don't know what cause. They won't admit they won't know what causes it. They'll say it's a chemical imbalance in your brain and you're broken for good and we don't know how to fix it. But, these medicines will temporarily set it right. And if you stop taking them, it'll come back.
And yet, aren't there people who are cured? Who do not have symptoms anymore?
There are.
They just ignore this.
That happens. Well, it depends.
It's rare enough that they don't consider it.
It does happen. Sherry, my cohort, who's been there for years. I mean, you might want to interview her after me because she's been there. Yeah. And I met her while working in the prison, and we were both doing prison reform stuff. So I couldn't attack my own prison system because they wiped me out. But we were both attacking the Alabama prison system, which is one of the worst. I mean, it's on the bottom of the scale. And she had somebody in there that she cared about, and we were both fighting that system. And then one day, she had one of the biggest prison reform sites in the U.S. And then one day we were just chatting, and I was telling her about a schizophrenic patient I had, and the weirdness that was going on with him. And she goes, and this is after 10 years of working with her. She goes, I know all about that. I've been there. That's the first time she told anybody.
Wow.
And then, I went, what? She's one of the most spiritually advanced people I know. I'm
Huh.
like, how could this be? So I started firing questions at her that
Yeah.
only somebody who'd been there would
Mhm.
know. And it was like, bam, bam, bam. She'd answer one after another. And I was just, what?
Wow.
What? She found the way to get out, which was exactly what I found. You know, I was experimenting with a bunch of different areas, and she found one channel that was very powerful.
Mm.
And that's a lie program. She found that what these voices were telling her were consistent lies, that you couldn't believe anything they said. Now, that was one of the things I would tell my patients, but there were other things, like move towards spiritual stuff, and all these other things in the package. But hers was one of the most effective, and she used it to free herself. You might want to talk to her about that.
I would love to.
It's one of the things we have on our website, and one of the things we'll have. We've got a book about ready to come out. It's one of the things we have in there. But yeah, they tell consistent lies. So they would tell the patients not to trust their parents, not to trust. They would tell the patient that the psychiatrist was poisoning them, just like they did at the state hospital. Don't take your meds, and they would point to the side effects as the effects of being poisoned. The voices would say, you don't believe you're being poisoned. Look at this. Your mouth is dry, you have sexual dysfunction, you can't think straight, your mind's all gummed up, all these side effects. And they go, yeah, don't tell me you're not being poisoned. They are being poisoned.
They are, right. Yeah, it's not
but
untrue. It's just
it's not untrue.
Not helpful, maybe.
But it's the best thing that medical science has right now
Yeah.
to bring them back to sanity. With long-term usage, their peripheral nervous system is being rotted out. I've seen them at the state hospital when, after years of Thorazine, they called it the Thorazine shuffle.
Yeah.
They would just shuffle. They was like not a regular gait. It was like a shuffling action. Their nervous system was so burnt out.
It's like a zombie.
So, yeah, like a zombie. But yeah, so you got that going on. Then the voices are telling them, don't trust your parents. They don't trust the psychiatrist. Your boyfriend's lying to you, your parents are lying to you. So they're trying to break them off, so they're isolated.
Yeah, it's like an abusive person.
Very, very abusive, very negative, very nasty, very, and they try to tell sane people about these things, and boom, they're shut down. Oh, they're not real. That's, you're crazy. There's something really wrong with you. Those things don't exist. You're mentally ill. You take your medicines. And here they are carrying conversations on with these things. They know they're real. So the parents drag him into a psychiatrist, and then the psychiatrist said, yeah, your brain's broken. There's no hope for you. You've got to take these things, and puts them on these meds, and they go off the meds, and then they get in trouble and they're put back on the meds again. And the parents are screaming at them to take their meds, and they don't understand what's going on. And the patient's trying to get away from them and acting weird, and they have no idea what's driving that. They don't believe that entities exist that have taken over their minds. It just doesn't, it's incomprehensible to them, and it's scary because they don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
They don't know why their son or daughter, who they've known for years, has all of a sudden become somebody else, a totally different person, but it's the same body. And this is what they're coming into the hospital with, this trust. So getting into the prison, getting into, to get them to talk about the voices. It took me years to figure out how to make them comfortable enough to talk about their voices. And it was experiment after experiment. And what I found is that if you learned something that the rest of psychology didn't know, and you gave that to them and just said, well, this is what I know so far. I don't know what these things are, but I'm not, I don't know what to think about them. This is what I've found that contradicts what psychiatry is saying, but I don't know. Tell me, you teach me.
Yeah.
And man, they did. you know, hundreds of them, and some of them paid very dearly for it. Their voices tortured the hell out of them for giving me information.
Mm.
You know, and kind of what one thing that flows. I mean, that we're kind of doing this like flow of consciousness thing, and this
Yeah.
is what's flowed into mind. Um, I got two pieces here. This is a poem. We've got a schizophrenic support group that we've started. And we started originally to support schizophrenics so they could talk to each other about their voices.
Yeah.
But it's kind of taken on a life of its own, and a very strange life of its own, because here's all these other people who wanted to join, who wanted to learn about the voices, but weren't necessarily schizophrenic themselves.
Wow.
There were some who were functioning and had voices, didn't know what they were, but they were still functioning. And yesterday, a psychiatrist from Egypt wanted to join so he could learn about the voices. So I'm
Wow.
like, holy cow! And it's
It's like
just,
you're starting a real school and a real help network that is actually
yeah,
effective.
and it's taking on a life of its own.
Good.
With the people are being attracted and pulled into it, and they're talking to one another, and every once in a while I'll chime in to make sure it's try to keep it on some kind of a track, but they've kind of got their own life now. It's like we started it, but it's taken on a life of its own.
Wow.
So yesterday a poem came in. One of the patients wrote the poem, and this is what she wrote. She said, "The darkness has come again. There is no light. The voices have taken over. I have lost myself again. Then, after what seems like this will never end, a tiny light comes in. I hold on to this light until it brings me back to myself again. I will never give up. I will always hold on. No matter how dark it gets, there is always a way back." So she published that
Wow.
in the group.
How powerful.
And then I asked the group a couple of months ago, I said, what is it you want people to know? You've been beat down, you've been, marginalized, you've been told that what you're hearing are hallucinations, that they're not real, that you're mentally ill, that you're sick. We know that's not the case. We know
Yeah.
what causes these things. What do you want them to know? I'm giving you a voice
Yeah.
for the first time in your life. What do you want the public to know? What do you want psychiatry to know? Yeah. And I got one response, and this gal was hearing voices. She said, the most important thing to point out is that the voices are not hallucinations, but are in fact malevolent demonic entities that audibly terrorize people and feed off the extreme negativity they cause. Additionally, the rest of the public is also being affected by them. As in my case, she's still getting hit by them, as they can influence us by inserting negative thoughts into our minds and pushing destructive desires, habits, and addictions in an effort to destroy our lives. And then they can feed off all the chaos they produce. They are parasites feeding off the strife they orchestrated from behind the scenes by negatively influencing humanity. Lastly, I have personally found success with a version of Sherry's That's a Lie program, which I was telling you about,
Right.
where I stop the intrusive thoughts by strongly rejecting, renouncing them, and as they are happening, and saying they are not my thoughts. I would never think that way, and ordering them to stop. I hope this helps, and thanks again for all your years of research into this and into deciphering the true origins of the voices. So
Wow.
that's just two things, and then I got a number of cases here. But the reality of the situation is, when you get depressed, you don't have any energy.
Yeah.
These things have complete access to your entire memory. They can
Yeah.
bring up every rotten thing you have ever done in your life and throw it to the forefront and rub it in your face
Yeah.
until your emotional state is negative, and then they come and drain that emotional energy off of you. And
Yeah.
and I noticed that with the schizophrenics, both at the I noticed at the state hospital, they reported when the voices came, they were drained.
Yeah.
And then when I got to the state prison where I had more freedom to experiment with these things, I noticed that too. It was consistent. Every time the voices hit them, they were drained. So I came up with this questionnaire because I wanted to kind of at least subjectively do this.
Yeah.
I don't know if you can read this. Let me
Yes.
pull it to where I can. So you can see in the first place, it's how much energy did you have before the voices came. The middle is how much energy did you have while they were present or attacking you. And the third one was how much energy did you have after they left. And this is the actual response from one of the, make sure there's no name on it. Yeah. From one of the prisoners. You
Wow.
notice 100, 40 something, and then 10, or the
With
other way
zero.
around. Yeah.
Right.
100 before, 45 during, 10 to 0 afterward. And this was completely consistent. It happened every single time. And we actually did an analysis of variance on this, and it was statistically significant. So
Yeah.
there are things that they can research if they wanted to.
Yeah.
If
And
they
it's
would ever get
reproducible,
and
right? If it's that
it's
consistent.
exactly reproducible.
Yeah.
You
Wow.
know, another consistency is that the voices are consistently negative.
Yeah.
They don't ever waver from that unless it's to get you in more trouble.
Yeah.
You know?
For just like a moment
Right.
to get you
That-
to something that you can destroy yourself. Like that guy when you were talking about who went and got all that weed and then sold it, but he went straight to hookers and blow and, much.
yeah.
Yeah. Much
So they were
worse.
telling him all this stuff he thought was great.
Like,
You know,
yay.
the hookers, the alcohol, all this stuff he's destroying himself with,
Yeah.
slowly, but not, he thought it was great. And I don't know how many prisoners told me that after they were out of meth, the voices would tell them where to be and when to be there, and somebody would show up with the meth over and over and over again. That would happen. Yeah. So in order to do something about these things, you have to know what they are.
Yes.
And how they operate. Hallucinations, which psychiatry and the psychiatric mafia say these voices are, hallucinations are random.
Yes.
A hallucination could be anything. It could be positive, negative, neutral, crazy. It could be all over the place. It's random. It's just there's a definite pattern to these things. They are always consistently negative, unswervingly negative. The question that they don't want to even, first of all, they don't want to even look at that.
Mm-hmm.
What holds them negative? What is it that confines them to a negative tract and doesn't allow them to go all over the place like regular hallucinations?
Right.
What force holds them on a negative trajectory? What is it that does that? They won't even look at the fact that they are negative. They don't ask patients what they think, that if they ask them, they're reinforcing their hallucinations. I mean, it's madness. It's just madness. And this is psychiatry, and then past that, you talk about the madness of psychiatry. We're just going all over the place. I don't think we're going to get anything consistent anything here.
It's fascinating though, because the concepts. If there's a theme. If there's a theme, the theme is, like you're saying, that we're learning that this is consistently negative, that it seems to be pretty obvious that it's an entity that is outside of ourselves, however you want to describe that. I'm going to call it a demon because that's what I think it is. And that's consistent through all the cases you're bringing up and all the evidence that you've found. And that itself is groundbreaking and fascinating and should tell people a lot. But it also, I think, could help bring us towards preventing it, protecting ourselves from it, or curing.
Exactly. Because all of us are being hit.
Right. Like that person said.
Hit, Yeah. Like you're walking down the sidewalk and all of a sudden you have this horrible thought that comes out of absolutely nowhere.
Yes.
And it's like, oh my God, how horrible, like, kill that person in front of you, or, where did that come from? That doesn't belong to me. And you're horrified that you had that thought, and you're upset that you had that thought.
Yeah.
You feel guilty, and you're kind of like, but because you've been taught that all thoughts are yours, so that one must be too.
Right.
And it freaks you out, and you're kind of like, oh no, that's, and you can't even deal, it's like push it out, and I can't even deal with it. That's them. They threw that in, and it doesn't fit you,
right?
Or somebody does something that irritates you, and you kind of go, yeah, why don't you do this to them, or why don't you say that to them? I mean, they're constantly at work on all of us to different degrees. The schizophrenic is where it is most clear.
Yes.
With the rest of it,
maybe that's where they're finding the most purchase or something too. Maybe
Well,
that's where they're having the most effect. But like you're saying, like if it's affecting all of us all the time, then there's something we want to know about that and how to
yeah. Look at the
fight
world.
back.
Look at what's
Right.
going on right now. Look at all the wars. Trump has just pulled us out of all the wars. This is the first time we've not been in a war for decades.
And
You
people
know,
are mad about it.
and people are mad about it,
Yeah.
especially the military-industrial complex. Like,
Right.
oh, these guys are evil. They're nasty. They're rotten. And Trump's going, that's their problem. That's their neighborhood. Let them deal with it. We don't need to be over there. But yeah, here's some interesting statistics. So schizophrenia is one of the top 10 world health problems.
Wow.
And what research has been accused of, and I had that article here somewhere, I'm so friggin' disorganized, that they were accused of not spending enough money on research for schizophrenia, and they didn't. They didn't. So what the NIMH did is they took a bunch out that they reported false statistics to make it look like, they said, oh, all these other schizophrenics aren't schizophrenics. We're going to call them something else now. And now it looks like they're spending a massive amount of money on it. It was a political.
It's just like what you were talking about, where they can skew the data, and they were teaching you how. It's like
Yeah,
here they are
yeah,
doing it.
yep. Here they are doing it, and I actually had that article somewhere, but that's what they were doing. And they just did that recently. Who reported it? It was the Wall Street Journal reported they did that.
Wow.
So there's like 2.5 million that are affected in the U.S. alone. Over 24 million people worldwide, where these voices have completely taken them over to the point where they can't function.
Yeah.
The suicide rate. Suicide is the leading cause of death for schizophrenics.
Mm.
So here's these things, telling them to kill themselves.
Yeah.
They're no good. They're rotten. Nobody likes them. Nobody loves them. They're worthless. They're stupid. They're crazy. May as well just kill yourself and get it over with. That's their exact words. And they say the same thing. They were saying the same thing in the state hospital, 2,000 miles from where I am now, as they were saying here in the prison and the hospital and the ERs. It's almost like they're all made out of the same cookie cutter. They give the same messages. It's almost like they're all programmed to say these things.
They know the things to say that will get them the best results in for what they're after.
I think so. It's almost like they've all been schooled or something, which blows my mind too.
Yeah.
I mean, most of these people that I've talked to have never met each other. The people at the state hospital have never met anybody in the hospitals here in Arizona. I mean, this is all, and they're all saying the same things.
Yeah.
The voices tell me this. They're, it's like, oh, you think psychiatry would notice something like that? Oh,
yeah.
no. They're hallucinations, man. You can't pay. What? You want me to pay attention to hallucinations? What would my fellow psychiatrists say? Oh my God.
That's terrifying.
You guys are out of freaking control.
Right.
So 4 out of 10 schizophrenics will kill themselves. Their suicide rate is estimated to be 5 to 10 times that of the general population.
God.
They're at the far end of the normal curve. Suicide's their leading cause of death. 4 out of 10 of them will attempt to kill themselves. Now,
wow.
Would you think they are a very stable population doing that?
Mm.
No. You know what the suicide rate of psychiatrists is?
Mm.
Virtually equivalent.
Really?
Yes, really. That blew my mind when I found that. According to the Journal of American Medical Association, the suicide rate for psychiatrists is 65 out of 100,000, or 5.9 times higher than that of the general population, which is equivalent to the suicide rate of schizophrenics, which is 5 to 10 times that of the population.
Well, so why do you think that is? They're immersed in this, in dealing with these people who are afflicted with these entities, and maybe that kind of rubs off on them, or?
I suspect it. I mean, these are supposed to be the nation's mental health experts.
Yeah, right.
And their suicide rate is equivalent with psychotics.
Oh, that's terrifying.
That won't come out. I mean, they would tell you that.
Well, and do you know if psychiatrists know this about themselves? Are they going into this knowing that they may likely be heading towards suicide?
You got to be kidding.
criminal.
They're
Yeah.
being told, hey, you're the peak of the peak. You're the head of the mental health system. When you get out, you're going to be directors of hospitals and you're doctors and you will have this all say all and do all and have all this power. They even got up before the United Nations and said, we want to take control of education. We want to take control of the churches. It's important that we have our hands in all the. I have that article somewhere. I got to get organized where I can present this stuff.
I can back you up because I've been a teacher for like 14 years in education so far, and just in the past handful of years, there's been a big push to start making teachers kind of counselors, like trying to be aware of our students' mental health and reporting and recording and information that might indicate whatever about their mental health. And I've been fully against it the whole time, knowing that teachers are barely qualified to teach, let alone evaluate mental health and recommend treatment.
Well, you don't have to get into it that deep. I mean, you see a kid that looks depressed all the time, doesn't have any energy. You see a kid that comes with bruises. You see a kid that's really withdrawn, missing school a lot. That kind of stuff.
Right. And you can have an effect on someone who you notice, right?
You can have a huge effect if some of these people are turned into child protective services. Somebody would be watching that abuse.
You hope.
Well, they're overwhelmed.
But that's the thing is I worry if you turn them into mental health or to child protective services that hopefully something good happens, but maybe not. Because I don't necessarily believe that the people who are pushing to have more mental health control or more CPS control have the best interests in mind. I feel like a lot of them do who work for those organizations, but the people who are kind of like pushing the societal changes, I don't trust them.
Well, I don't either. But, I've seen, I've worked with CPS, and it does disrupt some of that. Even if they know that they're being watched.
True.
They will pull back and not dish out as much crap to these poor kids. True. And heaven helps schizophrenics, that have kids, because the voices are wanting to destroy the voices want to kill those kids. They hate kids. They hate kids more than they hate anything else.
Why do you think that is?
It's weird. I guess they're so innocent. It's the opposite of what they are.
Yeah.
So they go, oh yeah, there's a genetic link between schizophrenia and children. No, I think they're bred that way.
Right.
That they're taught to be that way, and they're prepared for the voices who then jump in later. I don't think there's any biological, and they haven't found any biological anything.
No, so it makes sense that it's environmental and kind of trained into them.
Yeah. So I talked to you about the assault rate before. So a study of 120,000 assaults from 1987 to 1992. This is over 5 years. The assault rate for all jobs, 12.6 per thousand. The assault rate for doctors other than psychiatrists, 16.2 per thousand. The assault rate for custody staff, I mean, these are people who are around
like 24 hours,
24 hours, 69 per thousand. The assault rate for the little time psychiatrists spend around these patients, 15 to 20 minutes, half an hour at the most, 65 per thousand. Wow. So the assault rate for people who are around them 24 hours, 69. The assault rate for psychiatrists, 65.
So if you adjusted for the time, it would be astronomical.
Oh yeah, it'd be astronomical.
That's insane.
So the time they spend with these individuals, so their assault rate is almost 6% higher than any other doctor or any other job.
Yeah.
They're getting the crap kicked out of them.
Well, it's almost like the system itself is perfect for these demonic entities to get everything they want, because especially in prisons, no one's being helped really, unless like saints like you are going in and helping, but the system as it is isn't helping. The medication is like, no, making it maybe easier for people to have some sanity, but in the in the end, it's not like the cure, it's not the
No,
thing that's actually going to stop it.
not curing anything.
And these
So,
psychologists or psychiatrists are in the midst of it, and they're
yep, they're just trying to keep them down.
right.
So you look at the insanity with prisons. I mean, here's one guy escapes. Okay, he's a murderer. I mean, there's murderers all over the place. I mean, they're out there. The prisons are full of them. A lot of them have avoided being sent to prison. They're out there.
Yeah.
So here comes the mainstream media going, "Oh man, this murderer has escaped. Lock your doors. He's loose. He's loose in the city. He got out. He's roaming the streets. Close your windows. Lock your doors. Get your gun." And here's they whipping up everybody into this frenzy for this one guy that got out. Yet at the same time, every day they are releasing people that are in much worse shape with $50 in the first case and 2 weeks worth of psychotic medications.
God.
And saying, when you run out of your psychotic medication, your antipsychotics, go to the nearest ER. That's what they're saying. And I've seen them release people that I knew would kill somebody within a month or two. They were so psychotic. So here they're taking these, they destroyed the mental health system. They destroyed the state hospital system. They've closed down all the hospitals due to Proposition 13, because they didn't want to pay for them. And then they pay for prisons that are 10 times more expensive to house the same people that don't have any treatment there.
Have no help at all. Yeah.
It's worse.
Yeah.
Not only are they not getting any help, they are being brutalized not only by the staff, by the system, but by other inmates.
Yeah.
And there's inmates in there, the gangs are taking their medications and saying, we don't want you sane, we want you crazy. And I'm telling you, this guy in this other gang, he's trying to kill you. We're telling you this. You need to get him first.
God. And
they keep feeding him that until this guy attacks somebody in the other gang, and he's crazy. So they're using them as human torpedoes. And there was one time with this infuriated me. This one psychotic guy. He was off his meds, and he was threatening to kill this other inmate. And I sent him over to the medical unit. The psychologist, this jerk, sent over a stooge to the medical unit to re-diagnose them something else and send them back saying, no, they're not psychotic. They're an antisocial personality disorder. Basically the same thing they did with the National Mental Health Institute. We'll call them something else and they'll disappear. Right? But this guy was working up. I mean, every time he came in, he goes, I'm going to kill this guy. I'm going to kill this guy. The voices are telling me 3 times. I sent him over the second time. They sent him back again. He's not psychotic. He's a personality disorder. And the whole time I'm documenting in his medical record everything he's saying, what he's planning, what he's saying, that he's off medications in detail. Sent him over there a third time saying, you need to do something about this. No, they want to save their medication. They don't want to spend money on medications. They sent him back again,
God.
Saying, no, he is not psychotic. And I wrote up again. 2 weeks later, he stabbed somebody 13 times. He didn't kill him, but he stabbed them 13 times.
Wow, it's amazing he didn't kill them.
Mad. I know. I was so mad I couldn't go to work for 2 days because I was afraid I'd beat the shit out of that chief psychologist.
Yeah.
I was so furious. And here's what he's doing. Oh, I'm going to work my way up the line. I'm going to be a big honcho. I'm saving the system money. They're going to pat me on the butt for this. And I don't know.
Yeah. How people can't see the direct consequences of their actions and harming people like that is incredible. But it's like the system is made to produce that almost,
Well, it is. Yeah. I mean, it is the devil's workshop.
Mm-hmm.
No good thing in there goes unpunished.
Right. Well, I can imagine how that would be so hard for you to go back, but I'm amazed at how long you've lasted, and it's very commendable. Are you still going? I mean, I know you have your support group.
No, they couldn't. they couldn't drag me back in there
Yeah.
with a pickup truck, man.
Well, because it sounds like now you're doing actual good. I mean, not that you weren't then, but that like outside of the system, you can create something even better.
I could not bring this kind of stuff up while I was working there.
Yeah.
I'd be fired, or I'd be on the hot seat within months. You know, what are you doing? You're a lunatic. You're, you know,
Right.
you're crazy. They've had 35 years to lock me up. I've been working shoulder to shoulder with psychiatrists the whole time. You know, I've got the state's meritorious service award. They gave me that.
Nice.
You know, so you know, I'm a commercial pilot. I'm a scuba diver. You know, they had their chance.
Yeah.
They blew it.
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, that's what's going on. So by the time these guys get to a psychiatrist, they've been pretty well shut down. They don't want to talk about this stuff.
Mhm.
They see that if they talk about their voices, people will leave them. They'll say they're nuts. They're crazy. They're in trouble. They'll get away from them. They'll be isolated, and that's what the voices want. They want them isolated so nobody can interfere with what they're doing. Yeah.
Right.
So the whole thing with mental health so far has been controlling these guys and not trying to cure them.
Yes.
You know, talk therapy is for the most part, traditional talk therapy is like spitting in the wind.
Yes.
You know,
I try to tell people that. I know it can be helpful for a lot of people in a lot of ways, but it is never going to be the thing that I don't want to even use the word cure, but do you know what I'm saying? It's not going to be the thing that heals you.
It will be if they understand what's going on.
Yeah.
You know, if somebody can teach them that these voices are not who they are,
right,
that they are not insane, that they're infested, and that they have a battle to fight, and this is how to fight it.
Yeah.
You know, then they are started to recover. And that's when I got in the most trouble at the prison. I was put under investigation for, what did they call it? Experimenting with prisoners without departmental permission, which I never would have got.
Yeah.
You know, and they didn't have, they were trying for years to get proof of it. But they couldn't, because none of the schizophrenics I work with would tell them anything. But then when they started recovering and totally going off their meds and still saying sane, that came to their attention. You know, what is he doing in there with them, and why aren't they taking, and why are they staying sane? And he must be doing something that is not an approved therapy.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's more important to them than the fact that you're getting results.
That's exactly right. The same thing with the licensing bureau. You must work within these bounds. You have to have an approved therapy that doesn't friggin' work.
Yeah.
But we're saying if you're going to want to work under our license, you have to have this, and you need to stay within these bounds, which is way outside of the truth. You know, and it's like it's friggin' unbelievable.
It's so exhausting and disappointing to see that, and I can't imagine how that has felt for you. But how are you now that you have these other projects going and you're seeing results with that still, and bringing all of this massive amount of intelligence and, you know, information that you've gathered, bringing that to bear in this project?
Well, that's just hearing from the people it's helping on the internet. I get all these emails from thank you for what you're doing, and thank God, and you've really helped me, but I've never worked so hard for no money in my life.
Yeah. I understand.
But we do have a book coming out. We've been working on it for a long time, and Sherry's my co-author, because she's been there. So we're blending her perspective with my perspective, with the perspective of Milton Van Dusen, who was a clinical psychologist who worked in California and had all these conversations with the voices that we've put in there. Cool. And also the works of Emanuel Swedenborg, a Christian mystic who knew about this stuff well before we did. So Van Dusen was a student of Swedenborg, and when he started reading Swedenborg, he said, hey, what he's saying matches perfectly with what my schizophrenics are telling me about the voices. So here's Van Dusen talking about evil spirits, and this is what they say, and this is how they act, and here's a clinical psychologist going, well, wait, there's no difference here. you know. And then when
Yeah.
things started getting, I mean, I haven't told you about some of the most intense experiences. Things got very intense. These things did not want this information out.
Yes.
And man, they they scared the hell out of me a number of times.
Yeah.
You know, the it first started coming on when I interfered with them enough to where prisoners started coming in and saying, "Listen, the voices are really getting pissed off with you. They're really getting pissed off with you. They don't like what you're doing. They're telling me not to come. They're telling me you're full of crap. They don't like what you're doing."
Mm.
And then one turns around shortly after that, and he turns around as he's leaving the office after a session. He says, "You realize what you're doing is dangerous, don't you?" I didn't think so. I thought these things were like ghosts and they were stuck in their heads. They couldn't come out. You know, I'm like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's your problem. They're stuck in you. I'm going to see what I can do to help you out, but they're in you. They ain't me. They're
Yeah.
in you. But one thing I did notice, and I didn't know what caused it, is that after working with more than two of these guys at a time, I would come out completely drained.
Mm.
And I didn't know what was causing that because I wasn't aware of the energy drain
Yeah.
clearly at that time. So
Right.
I countered that by not scheduling more than one or two a day. Otherwise, I'd come out of there drained, and I had no idea why. Um, but yeah, then the one comes up and says, "You realize what you're doing is dangerous," and I didn't. And the complaints kept coming. You know, they don't like what you're doing. They don't like what you're saying. They don't like you. They're telling me not to come. And then
That's how you know you're going the right way.
well, you know, pretty strange for a hallucination is what I was
Right.
thinking. You know, what kind of hallucination doesn't like what I'm doing here?
Right.
And then one comes and he says, this is a guy I've been working with extensively. He said the voices want to talk to you, and I'm like, they want to speak to me personally. That had never happened before. It
Yeah.
was always the patient would tell me what they were saying, and then
Right.
I would tell the patient to tell them to go stick their head in the lake or jump in a pond or, you know, eat crap or whatever. You know, so it was this
Mhm.
conversation through the patient. You know, they're telling me you're stupid and you're crazy and you're dumb and you know, and I'd say, well, tell them to go stick their head in the toilet and da 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 da. And it was like,
Mhm.
I didn't know exactly what I was dealing with, but it didn't feel like a hallucination.
Yeah.
And I wasn't sure exactly what it was. I knew whatever it wasn't good.
Mhm.
Yeah. So then this happens, and I'm like, it took me back, and I'm like, okay, come on in, sit down, and closed the door and said, what do the voices have to say? And these words came out of his mouth. I got to drink water before I say this.
Yikes.
They're burned into my memory. His voice tone changed just a little bit, and the words that came out of his mouth were, "You have no right to interfere with our way of life." And I'm like, holy shit.
Yeah.
You know, our way of life.
Our way
And
of
then the
life.
prisoner said, I didn't say that. Those weren't my words. They came
Wow.
from the voices. I didn't say that. And I'm like, whoa.
Oh.
You know, that blew me away. It was like, you know, I canceled appointments for the rest of the day and had to let that sink in.
Mm.
You know, and it was like, that was after all this other stuff, after seeing
Yeah.
all this other stuff that I've told you about. I was still in denial
Wow.
as to what these things really were. I didn't
Well,
want to
because
see
you're
this.
coming from this trained history of a materialist and psychological and, that
Yeah.
background, I'm sure is hard to break through.
Well, you know, it was a strange combination because I didn't believe fully what the authorities were telling me,
Right.
but I didn't fully disbelieve it either. But
Yeah.
the more evidence that came in, the more it looked like they were full of crap.
Right.
And then when this happens, it's like, no, these things are not hallucinations. You know?
Right.
And I'm looking at this guy, and he wasn't lying to me. See, to be a psych in a prison, you have a lot of power,
Mhm.
you know, and to get prisoners who've already been deemed unstable and dangerous to talk to a member of the staff about this
Openly.
kind of stuff
Right.
is extremely difficult. It
Yeah.
required, it was a strange balance of trust,
Yes.
and it was like walking on a razor because, I couldn't turn them in for everything their voices were telling them to do because then they'd be completely shut down. The word would get out all over the prison yard. You can't trust this guy with anything.
Right.
So I'd have to ask them, well, okay, I have to determine how much control they actually had and what the likelihood was that they would lose control. And I had a special group every time always had a special group of inmates that promised they would tell me everything their voices were telling them in real time while I was in session with them. And I learned a tremendous amount from that. And they paid
Yeah.
a big price because the voices would make them miserable. They would cause headaches. They would cause sweats. They would mentally torture them for telling me this information. And there were a lot of valiant patients who withstood that to give me this information.
Yeah.
So now, on the other hand, if one of them did lose it, and I'd let him go and didn't turn him in, and he hurt somebody, that would be my job.
Right.
So it was like walking on this razor's edge of
Wow.
having to determine what I had to, and I'd made it clear to them. I won't turn you in unless I determine you are a threat, a serious threat to either yourself or somebody else.
Right.
And that includes another inmate. So I'd warn them ahead of time. But at the same time, I'd say my office is always open to you no matter what's going on. You come and throw pebbles at my window, I'll look out and I'll get you in as soon as I can.
Yeah.
So to try to, if one was starting to lose it, I'd be able to pull him back and evaluate the situation. So it was, they had to trust me not to have them locked down and put on more meds. And I
Right.
had to trust them,
To let you
not,
know if they're gonna
and
go
not to
off.
do anything bizarre,
Right.
So it was a very touchy balance.
What a blessing for all of you, though, because they finally get to have someone who they can trust and who can actually help them, and you get to understand more deeply the nature of what's actually going on here.
Well, I think this training went back, again, to my childhood. There was this distrust of authority, but also with my dad. He was fairly abusive, and being a little kid, I couldn't stand up to him physically.
Right.
But what I did learn to do to fight back was to drive him to the very edge, the very edge of blowing up and then backing off.
Yeah.
And there were many times where I went over and missed the signals and got the shit kicked out of me. That came in so useful in working with these guys.
That makes
Because
sense.
you have a psychotic, a criminally insane inmate in front of you. And it's like, how much can I push this guy? And how much information can I get out of him before he starts coming unraveled?
Yeah.
And that training was invaluable because
Ultra fine perception.
ultra fine. How far? Just how right to the very edge can I push these guys to get information out of them? And that worked very well clinically too, because I could write a report and say, "This is how far gone this guy is. Something needs to be done."
Yeah.
And I could spot this stuff much quicker than anybody else.
Yeah.
So I wasn't very popular with the chief psychologist who was trying to save medications.
Good, though. I mean, this is something that I noticed that I feel like is a pattern with a lot of people who are kind of seeing evil in the world and doing a lot of good in the world, is that they themselves have spent time in evil somehow, right? Like being abused in some way, or like Sherry, your partner was, actually experiencing these attacks directly. And that is an even more powerful force of good then, because you actually know. It's not theoretical, and it's not something you're guessing about. You've experienced it.
Once you experience it, it's real.
Right.
And there's a number of psychiatrists in the world that could ever come and tell me that these were hallucinations.
Right.
And any of them who do, I mean, have you ever studied them? Have you ever asked your patients? No, they don't ask them anything. They tell them what to think. They tell them what to do. They don't listen to them at all. You know?
They got it out of a book, and then they
got it out
out
of a book, and then that's the way it
gospel.
is, and that's what the educational system is doing. You know, they're programming people to think the way they want them to think.
Right.
You know,
Well, if we could head towards starting to wrap things up, and you could talk to the people who are listening about something that they could do that would either protect themselves or help them help other people who might be experiencing negative attacks of some sort or psychoses of some kind, what kind of advice might you give to people?
well, I think number one is you are not your thoughts. And if you think you are, step back and watch them come into your head.
Yeah.
And they don't flow in like the flow. All of a sudden, boom, they materialize and you're there.
Yeah.
You know, and you can sit there and watch that, go, whoa, where'd that come from? You know, you are the watcher. You are who is the one who's listening to all this crap?
Yes.
You're the one watching it. You're the one listening to it. Yeah? But you are not it. You are not your thoughts. The second thing would be every negative thought that comes into your mind about yourself or somebody else is put there by these entities.
Yes.
Every
Amen.
single one. Yeah. So if you call that and go, that's bullcrap, that's a lie, throw it out there. You know, with Sherry's program works for everybody. You know,
Yeah, you don't have to be psychotic to use it.
You don't have to be psychotic to use it. And you know, it's everybody is psychotic to some degree.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like a normal curve with everybody's got these things.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And the psychotics at the very end, the schizophrenics, they've got it. I mean, they've got it solid, but everybody's being hit all the time.
Amen.
And, you know, get on a positive spiritual path and stay there.
Yeah.
You know?
I love it.
Don't get sucked into the materialism of
Yeah.
And don't trust authority.
Yeah. Amen. Question everything. Well, that's some solid advice, and I like the key word there is like, you know, don't just get into the positive spiritual path, but stay there, because I think a lot of people do start something, they start to see effects of it, and then they kind of leave it behind because things maybe get better, and
Right.
it's easier to forget, you know. But you really do have to stick with it, because these entities aren't going to stop no matter where you go, no matter what you do.
And they have access to your entire mind. They can pull up. I mean, they can just pull up stuff that you forgot, horrible stuff that you did 15, 20 years ago.
Yes.
You know, and all of a sudden, boom, this pops in. Like, where did that come from? You know, I've had schizophrenics tell me they pulled up stuff they did 20 years ago that they haven't thought of for 20 years, and they pull it up and throw it at them.
In perfect detail.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that is something that can be really astonishing if someone experiences it all of a sudden, is that this thing has that access to every single detail, and it's very disconcerting and alarming.
Well, you look at how people remunerate over things. You know, a dog gets bit or a cat gets in a fight and it's over with. They don't think about that forever and ever and ever. It doesn't go on ever and ever. I remember watching a lion chasing a gazelle, and the gazelle narrowly escaped with its life. And the lion disappears and the gazelle looks around and it's like, oh, okay, it's gone. And then it goes back to eating grass like nothing ever happened.
Right.
No, not with humans.
No.
There's that thing in your head going, yeah, you screwed up, man. You really shouldn't have done that. Why did you say that thing? Oh boy, you really fucked up that time. You know, it's like, blah, blah, blah. That's them.
Yeah. Good point. Well, this is also something that I want people to be able to learn more about and find more information and follow what you're doing. And I want to know more about the book that's coming out. So where can we find more of you, and what do you have coming up, and how do we stay connected with that?
You know what? I should have been better prepared for this.
I know I had your site that I had found.
Yeah, there's some I remember. I mean, I had them all written down somewhere. I got to get organized. Sherry's always on me for being so friggin' disorganized.
Hey, you're more organized than many people, so.
Well, I don't know about
Not
that.
so bad.
But Sherry's got a website where she puts all this stuff. It's called keyholejourney.com.
That's it.
All right, and I'll tell you what, I'll look this stuff up and I'll send it to you via email.
Yeah, and I can put it in the notes.
You can put it in there, but they need to go to the paranormal section.
Okay.
And then to the other thing. But yeah, I'll look that stuff up. I got it somewhere here.
Okay. So it's keyholejourney.com, and then do you have a YouTube?
Yeah, I do, but I haven't looked at it forever. It's I'll send you that too.
Okay, I'll put
I
that in
need
the
to
notes
get
too.
on there because I haven't answered anything from that. I got Facebook. I got that.
There's
And
so
I
much to
actually
try to keep
saw
up
this.
with.
I actually saw this list not long ago. I mean, it was
Yeah,
like this afternoon while I was trying to get organized.
right. Well, and you just came back from China too, so I know it's not
So
easy to
yeah,
even
still reeling from that.
be in this time zone. But and then what's the book called, and what's the timeline that you're expecting for that?
Well, this is the first. Uh, we're still. This is the first initial copy.
Oh, okay.
Um, we're where is it? Okay, we're still working
Ooh, I
on
love
it.
that artwork.
The placement of the thing is there, and
Right.
so it's hard to blend the thinking of Sherry, who's been there,
Yeah.
me, who has only briefly been there, and looking in from the outside,
Yeah.
a Christian mystic who lived 700 years ago, and a clinical psychologist who I worked with for a year before his death, into one coherent message where we all know what we're talking about,
Yeah.
but the reader might not,
Yeah.
you know. So as I'm reading it again, I see, whoa, there needs to be a transition here.
Right.
So we'll probably have something out in a few weeks.
That's
We're
pretty
working
quick.
hard at it. We've been working at this for many months now.
Right. It takes a
Just trying.
lot.
It takes a lot. It takes a lot more than I ever thought.
I love that those four perspectives though coming together because that's every perspective you need to hit it from, I think, to
Oh
get
yeah,
people to
it
understand
covers
how,
all. It covers it all.
which is very persuasive and effective,
And to
I'm
blend
sure.
that together has been difficult, but it's happening. I mean, we're doing it, and Sherry's been invaluable. I'd highly suggest that you interview her
Yeah.
from her from her perspective.
Well, I would love to absolutely interview Sherry, have her on the show, and I would love to have you back as well because I'm sure you have tons
Oh
more that we could
yeah,
go into.
I don't know what
um,
we finished up here. Once I get organized, I have a bunch of actual clinical cases where I could bring the listener right there. This is what they're
yeah.
thinking. This is what they're feeling. This is what the voices are saying. And
Yeah.
actually take them there.
That
You
would
know,
be awesome.
I think it'd be a great help for people who are struggling with this and families who don't understand what's going on.
Or even people who are listening who may have experienced some of it themselves
Right.
too, I
And
think
it's
would be
amazing how
helpful.
many do. I mean, how many people are writing in and saying, people are waking up at a horrendous rate. I mean, I'm
Yeah.
just amazed because due to people like you,
Yeah. And
it's
you.
like, well, yeah, but I couldn't do this without you guys.
Well, thank you.
Without you guys saying, hey, we're willing to get this information out. I'm willing to talk to anybody who will listen because
Yeah.
this has to get out. So
Absolutely.
along with that, anybody who who is doing this kind of stuff,
Yeah.
send them my way.
Happily, I will absolutely. And I think you're right that like you said, it's that bell curve of people who have experiences. But also if there's like a curve of awakening, like you're saying, I feel like we're at like the crest and it's
Well,
gonna
no,
start.
it's going. I mean,
Yeah.
it's shooting up, and the administration is trying to bash it back down again, and they're trying to drug the entire population. Look at all the drugs in this place. In China,
Yes.
there wasn't anything like this.
Well, and they
You know,
don't
where
advertise it everywhere,
no,
like you're
no,
saying
no,
too.
no.
Yeah.
They've got psychiatry and the medical establishment and the psychiatric mafia dumbing down the entire population
From every
from
angle.
every angle. You look at this drug, that drug, this, and it's like, oh, it's unbelievable what they're doing. You know?
Yes. But like you're saying, like that, as we're nearing that crest, everybody waking up, they're trying to push back, but
Yeah,
they're not gonna
yeah,
be able to hold it back.
yeah. Especially with Trump, knocking them down. I mean,
I hope so.
woo, yeah. It's like a battle that's equal to the Civil War. I've never seen anything like this. Somebody's finally standing up to the deep state and the dark establishment, who's
Yeah.
had control over us for ever.
Forever. Yeah. Forever. I'm really excited to see where it goes. And fellow travelers of the path, it is a beautiful thing. This has been your analog, concentric, electric dose of wisdom, according to Jerry Marzinski. Jerry, thank you so very much for bringing this to us today. It's a pleasure to have you here.
You're more than welcome.
Thank you. So remember this truth, friends. Fear is the mind killer. There are things that go bump in the night, and the abyss is waiting to stare back at you to invite you into its numbing, detached embrace. It has all of the trappings of sensory indulgence, abdication from self-responsibility, and the ease of letting go of literally everything. And it's waiting to offer you any of that which you so desire. But like Admiral Akbar knew, it's a trap. And if you dabble too long, something reaches back and dabbles a bit in you. These intelligences are very real. They have actual measurable effects on ourselves and our world, and they are dangerous. But again, fearing them is not the answer. In fact, if you have more power than they ever could, and their only advantage is your ignorance of that truth. So never ever forget that you control which powers can exist in your sphere. And if you're ever in doubt, there's a very simple word that casts away any darkness that might be tiptoeing your way. Whether this word's power stems from a real human who really did ascend and left us a heritage to work with, or whether it stems from a quantum field of morphic resonance and billions of moments of intention shot forth from billions of humans throughout time, all you have to do is mention Jesus and every single darkness flees instantly. Poof, absolutely gone. I've experienced it and I know it's the easiest and most effective magic trick you'll ever wield. And so I hope you never need to, but until you slay your first demon, travel well, aim for balance, and always look inside first.
It's a one-on-one lesson, so do your homework. Make your dome hurt while up on earth. My bones are blessed from holy dirt. Vibes manifested to words that told me search for verbs and adjectives to describe birth. Worth more than one can speak, while the tongue feeds a weak, a sour taste in your mouth, bittersweet. Words can also kill you when you sleep. Mind condition, low frequencies while the subconscious mind listens. I can tell a vision filled with lies, disguised as truth, and spread it like the word to the youth. Watch the tube. A place where the God gets food is sorcery. To recreate the God forgery does more than meets the eye. Not too many know. Just hear me flow like the eye of Horus Pinio. Yeah, not ready to leave until we believe we're free to go. You hear me, yo?
Sculpted from the ether, the material will eat ya. Stuck on this plane, lanes use jet fuel to greet ya. The dimensional three ain't meeting me on top of the fourth. Didn't climb Jacob's ladder to squab with a sword. Forge with Yggdrasil, branch down, try quiet your lamps now. Ascension past the matter that they slam out they damn mouths. We ain't on land now, but they over understand. Sacrificing wisdom, hoarding dumber, kosher, wicked hands. Putting faith in worthless worship of the mortals. Artificial portals, mass ingestion of the black goo, bioengineered morsels. Conversing with machine elves, bypassing maggots. They stuck on Android screens now. I'm scrolling emerald tablets. Moloch living lavish, off the back to the savage. Them clasped hands at the Sabbath, smack of energy.